Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving through western Kansas late last spring, heading toward Colorado to visit my brother. I took back roads most of the way, long stretches of empty highway and farmland where you can go miles without seeing another car. It was one of those overcast evenings where the sky looks heavy and low, like it could rain but never quite does. The air was thick and the smell of wet soil carried through the vents. I had the windows cracked and the radio on low, just some local AM station fading in and out. About half an hour west of Great Bend, I noticed this soft, steady clicking sound coming through the speakers. It wasn't part of the broadcast, no music or static, just a rhythmic tick, 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 perfectly even, like a metronome. At first, I thought it was interference or a bad connection. I adjusted the tuner, but no matter where I set it, the clicking stayed. It wasn't loud, just constant. It had a kind of pattern to it, like two short clicks followed by one long one, repeating. I turned the volume all the way down, but the sound didn't stop. I thought maybe it was the engine, so I shut off the AC, rolled up the windows, and listened closely. It was definitely coming from the radio. I switched stations again, same thing. Even when the screen showed static, the clicking was still there. It wasn't totally unnerving at first, just odd. I kept driving, figuring it'd fade out once I got farther down the road, but it didn't. It stayed with me mile after mile, same steady rhythm. Around then, I passed a sign for a small town called Lorraine. It's basically a few houses and a gas station, surrounded by flat farmland. I hadn't seen another car for 20 minutes, so I slowed down a little, trying to figure out what the radio was picking up. The sound wasn't mechanical, not like relay switches or a bad spark. It almost sounded intentional. When I drove under a set of power lines, the clicking sped up for just a second, then slowed again once I passed. I thought that was strange, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe interference from the electrical lines or something with the car's antenna. I drove another few miles, and that's when I noticed the fields. There were cows on both sides of the road, hundreds of them, spread out across the pasture land. But every single one of them was facing the same direction, north. Perfectly aligned, none grazing, none moving, just standing still, all turned the same way. That's when I pulled over. The clicking stopped instantly. Not faded. Stopped. Like someone had flipped a switch. The silence hit me hard. No wind, no insects, no distant hum of highway noise. Even the air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I sat there with my hand on the key, waiting to hear the clicking start up again. Nothing. I looked out at the field closest to the road. The cows were maybe 50 yards away. A whole herd of them, frozen mid-graze, all staring in the same direction. Their ears didn't flick, their tails didn't move. Just a black and white line facing north. I turned the radio back on. Static. No clicking. I switched through every frequency, all the way up and down. Still nothing. I got out of the car. The smell of rain and manure hung in the air, but everything else felt wrong. The air was colder than before, noticeably colder. I walked to the edge of the ditch and stared out at the field. The cows were completely still. I could see their sides rising and falling as they breathed, but none of them turned their heads toward me. I shouted something, just a quick "hey," to see if they'd react. Not a single one moved. When I got back in the car and started the engine, the radio came alive again. The clicking returned, same rhythm, same volume. I sat there listening for maybe a full minute, trying to convince myself it was just interference. But then the clicking changed. The rhythm slowed, then paused, then started again, this time in shorter bursts, like it was responding to something. I turned the volume knob all the way down again, but the clicking didn't fade with it. It stayed exactly the same. Something about that made my stomach turn. I decided to get moving. As soon as I pulled back onto the road, the clicking sped up slightly, like it was matching the car's acceleration. I kept driving west, watching the fields on either side. More cows, same thing. Every single one of them facing north. After maybe 10 minutes, I noticed lights in the distance, orange and faint, maybe a half mile ahead. At first, I thought it was a combine working late or a truck parked on the shoulder. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't moving. The light was just hanging there above the field, not blinking, not flickering, just steady. The radio clicking slowed again. I rolled the window down. The air outside was dead quiet, no insects, no wind. The light was too bright to be a lantern, too dim to be headlights. It looked suspended, like it wasn't attached to anything. I slowed down but didn't stop this time. I passed within a few hundred feet of it, and it didn't move. Just hung there, about 20 feet above the ground, glowing orange like sodium light through fog. As I passed, the radio let out a sharp burst of static, loud enough to make me jump, then cut to total silence. No clicking, no sound at all. I drove another mile before I looked in the rearview mirror. The light was still there, same position, same brightness. I pulled over again, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. The second I stopped, the radio came back, clicking again, same slow rhythm. I looked at the fields on both sides. The cows this time were facing toward the road, every one of them. I don't know why, but that detail broke me. My skin went cold, and I got this overwhelming urge to leave. Not curiosity, just a deep sense that I shouldn't be there anymore. I hit the gas and didn't stop for 40 miles, not until I reached a small truck stop near Russell. I parked under the bright canopy lights and sat there, engine running. The clicking was gone. The radio worked fine. I turned it to a talk station and left it there, just to hear normal human voices again. When I went inside to grab coffee, I asked the cashier, a woman maybe in her 60s, if she'd ever heard weird radio interference out there. She looked at me kind of funny and said, sometimes the reception's bad near the wind farms, but that was about it. When I came back out, I could smell rain in the air again. I looked up. Clouds were thick and low. Just as I was about to get back in the car, a flicker of orange light flashed faintly across the fields to the east. Not lightning, just one soft pulse, like someone had switched on a light bulb behind a curtain and then off again. I drove straight through the rest of the night into Colorado. The radio never made another sound. 2 days later, my brother and I were driving back along that same stretch during the day. Clear skies, bright sun. We passed the same farmland, same herds. The cows were scattered randomly this time, grazing, moving normally. Nothing strange about them at all. I didn't mention it. But when we stopped for gas near the same area, I noticed something. On the hood of my car, thin streaks of dried residue, like faint gray dust. Not dirt, not pollen. When I brushed at it, it left a metallic smell on my fingers, like rust or burned wiring. That night, when I got back to my brother's place, I turned on the radio again out of habit. No clicking, no interference, just clean static between stations. But sometimes when I'm driving through flat country and hit a stretch with no cell signal, I still catch myself listening for that sound, the soft, steady tick, tick, tick underneath the noise. I had planned that weekend in the Taconic Mountains for months. Me and my girlfriend, Elise, wanted a simple camping trip. No cell service, no distractions. We drove up late Friday afternoon, the sky overcast, a little drizzle that turned into light rain as we set up our tent in a clearing about a half mile off the main trail. The trees were thick, the ground damp, and everything smelled like wet pine. By the time we got the fire going, it was almost dark. We ate some sandwiches, drank warm tea, and just listened to the rain dripping off the tent canopy. I remember Elise pointing out that the mist hanging low between the trees made the whole place feel unreal, almost like we'd walked into one of those old landscape paintings. Around 9, the rain stopped, but the mist stayed. I went out to grab more firewood and noticed a faint glow moving between the tree line. At first, I thought it was another camper's flashlight, but as I squinted, the light wasn't walking or swaying like someone carrying a torch. It hovered, slowly drifting low to the ground. I called Elise over, whispering, "Do you see that?" She nodded, wide-eyed. We watched as it moved through the fog, drifting left, then right, descending toward the denser part of the forest. I grabbed my flashlight and tried to track it, but the beam barely penetrated the mist. When I got closer, the light was gone. It just vanished. No trees moved, no sound, nothing. We stayed quiet for a long time. Even the usual night noises, Owls, rustling leaves, felt muted like someone had turned the volume down. I told myself it was a deer's eyes reflecting light or some weird trick of the fog. Elise agreed reluctantly, but she was tense, holding my hand tight. Later, we tried to shake it off and went back to the fire. I poked at the logs while she wrapped herself in a blanket. That's when I noticed the ground around our campsite. There were these flattened patches in the leaves, circular, perfectly round, scattered around the clearing. I shone my flashlight over them. They weren't muddy or disturbed, just pressed down as if something had hovered there briefly. No footprints, no broken twigs, no branches bent, just the leaves flattened. I pointed them out to Elise. She crouched down, running her fingers over the edges. "That's weird," she said. Not like an animal. Too neat." I agreed. My stomach was tightening. I kept thinking about the light from earlier, how it just disappeared, and now these impressions. Nothing fit. We stayed in the tent after that, the fire reduced to embers. Every little sound made me tense. A branch snapping somewhere, a distant rustle. The mist pressed against the tent walls, wet and cold. I thought I saw shadows move out there, shifting shapes that didn't match the trees, but every time I blinked, they were gone. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a soft humming sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the air was still. The sound was low, rhythmic, like a distant engine idling, but I couldn't place it. I nudged Elise awake. "Do you hear that?" She whispered yes. We stayed completely still, listening. The hum lasted maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. Nothing else. No echo, no movement in the forest, just silence again. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I dozed off, I'd dream of the light. Low, moving, watching, then vanishing. By sunrise, the mist had lifted, but the leaves around the campsite were still pressed down, glistening with dew. We packed quickly, both quiet, neither of us talking about what had happened. On the hike back to the trailhead, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that hovering light again. I didn't, but the feeling of being observed didn't fully leave me. When we got back to the car, I noticed something else. Small, circular impressions in the dirt near the edge of the clearing. Not footprints, nothing recognizable. Just perfect depressions, a few inches across, like someone or something had touched the ground lightly in several places. Elise noticed too, but we didn't linger. I didn't want to look too long, didn't want to hope I'd see anything else. Driving home, the roads were quiet. I kept thinking about the light, the patches of leaves, the hum. I tried to rationalize it all. Deer, swamp gas, reflections from distant cars, but none of it lined up. There was a logic to the impressions, a consistency to the way the light moved that didn't match anything natural I'd seen before. I've been back to the Taconic Mountains a few times since then, but I avoid that area, the clearing we camped in. I can picture it perfectly. The mist, the faint hovering glow, the pressed leaves in neat circles. And even months later, I still feel that subtle unease when I think about it, the sense that whatever we saw, it was aware we were there, just beyond the tree line, silent, watching. I haven't told anyone outside of a few close friends. Most would laugh it off, chalk it up to imagination. But I know what I saw. The leaves, the light, the hum. They didn't match anything ordinary. And even now, I keep glancing over my shoulder when I'm in the woods, half expecting that glow to reappear, drifting silently just above the ground, disappearing before I can get a proper look. It's not like I live in fear. I've been back to the mountains for hiking, for fishing, even for camping, but there's a tension I can't shake when I think of that weekend. It wasn't just a light or a trick of the mist. Something else was there, moving through the trees, and whatever it was, it left its mark. Neat, circular, deliberate, without ever showing itself fully. And that's what I keep coming back to. The part I can't explain, the part I can't make sense of. The leaves, the hum, the light hovering low, then vanishing. I've tried to rationalize it, to find some natural explanation, but nothing fits. And every time I picture it, the unease comes back, subtle but persistent, like the forest itself is still holding a secret just beyond the edge of the trees. We were camping near Black Hollow Ridge, out past Rifle, Colorado. Just 3 of us. Me, Nate, and Jordan. It was early September, the kind of weekend where the days were still hot, but the nights dropped into the low 40s. We'd gone up there to fish the creek and just get away from work for a few days. Nothing fancy, just tents, a cooler, and a fire pit we'd dug ourselves. It was our second night. The first had gone smoothly. Beers, a small fire, coyotes somewhere far off, that kind of thing. But the second night, the wind came in earlier. Around 8 p.m., it started kicking up enough that the trees swayed and we had to sit closer to the fire to keep warm. The sky was completely clear though. No moon, no clouds, just thousands of stars you never see from town. I remember Nate was trying to make chili over the camp stove, and Jordan was walking back from the truck with another 6-pack when I noticed the first light. It was red, faint at first, way above the ridge to the west. I pointed it out without thinking. "Is that a plane?" I asked. Jordan stopped and squinted. "Too low for a plane." We all watched for a second. The light wasn't moving, not up, not sideways, just hovering there, completely still. It pulsed a little, but not like a strobe, more like it was breathing. Then a second one appeared a few hundred feet to the right of it. At first, we assumed they were maybe tower lights or something on a distant structure, but there weren't any towers out there. We'd hiked that ridge earlier that day. It was nothing but scrub pine and sandstone. Then came the third light, appearing to the left of the first one. All three lined up in a perfect horizontal line, evenly spaced. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but it was too dark. The camera just showed blackness with faint pinpoints that didn't look like anything. I tried zooming in, but that made it worse. "Probably drones," Nate said after a while. He was trying to sound confident, but I could tell he didn't believe it. The lights were too steady. No noise, no drift. We listened hard, not even a hum, just wind and the crackle of the fire. We watched them for maybe 10 minutes. They didn't move at all. No flicker, no descent, no flash. Just 3 blood-red points against the stars. Then suddenly they shifted. It happened fast, but not instant. A smooth, fluid motion like they were connected somehow. The middle light dropped slightly while the outer two rose, forming a perfect triangle. We didn't speak at first. I remember the air going still, like the wind had just cut off. Jordan finally muttered, "What the hell?" I didn't answer. None of us moved. I could feel the hair on my arms stand up. The triangle hovered there, totally motionless again. Then one of the lights, the one at the top, flickered brighter for a split second. It was subtle, but it was enough to make me think it was signaling something. Nate took a step back from the fire. "Okay, that's not drones," he said quietly. "No way they can hold formation like that in wind." I checked my phone again. No signal. We were in a dead zone, same as the night before. I tried recording anyway, but when I looked at the screen, the lights didn't appear. The lens just showed faint static, like the pixels couldn't decide what to do. The lights didn't move for a long time, probably another 5 minutes, and then, just like that, they started to rise. All three lifted together, perfectly synchronized, climbing slow but steady. The triangles stayed intact the whole time. We followed them until they were so high we had to crane our necks back. Then, without warning, the top light blinked out. Then the one to the right, then the last. Each one went dark in order, a few seconds apart. The sky went back to normal. Stars, silence, nothing else. We didn't talk for a while. I don't even think we were breathing right. After a few minutes, Jordan said, "Could it have been flares?" "No," Nate said immediately. "Flares drift. They flicker. They drop." He pointed at the ridge. Those didn't move. We ended up staying up way later than planned, keeping the fire going, half because it was cold, half because none of us wanted to crawl into our tents. Every sound in the woods made me jump. Snapping branches, at the occasional rustle in the grass. It felt like the air had a weight to it after that. Around midnight, the wind picked up again. The tent flaps flapped like flags and the trees creaked. I thought I saw another faint right through the trees, but it was hard to tell if it was real or just my eyes adjusting. I didn't mention it. We didn't see anything else that night. The next morning, we all acted normal, but you could tell we were off. Nate packed faster than usual. Jordan didn't say much. When we drove down the dirt road back toward town, we stopped at a diner in Rifle for breakfast. There was an older couple sitting near us, locals by the sound of it. They were talking about strange lights over the ridge last night. We froze. Jordan asked them what they'd seen. The guy shrugged and said, "Just 3 red ones. Thought it was flares, but they didn't move right. My wife saw them too. They said it had been around 9 o'clock. same time we'd seen them. That shut us up pretty quick. None of us wanted to talk about it anymore after that. We went home that afternoon. I dropped Nate off at his apartment, then Jordan at his place outside Glenwood Springs. I got back to my apartment that night and tried to look up anything about it, meteor reports, military tests, anything. Nothing. A week later, Nate texted me a photo he'd taken of the ridge that afternoon from a distance. Perfectly normal. No towers, no antennas, no aircraft beacons, just rock and trees. He joked that we should go back out there sometime, but I could tell he wasn't serious. Neither was I. Sometimes when I think about it, I try to remember exactly how those lights moved, the precision of it, the way they held in that perfect triangle like something mechanical but not human. I can still picture how the air felt, dry and cold and dead quiet, and the way the fire's smoke seemed to hang lower while we watched. We never saw anything like it again. But I've driven past that ridge a few times since during the day, and every time without meaning to, I glance up at that same stretch of sky, half expecting to see 3 faint red lights lined up waiting. I was halfway through the last cold beer when Gus stopped mid-chew and stared up. We had the little patio light on and the sprinkler set to the front lawn, the kind of late summer night that makes your skin feel like it's holding on to the day. My wife was at a friend's and I'd promised myself a quiet hour outside before collapsing into bed. Gus, boxer mutt, ridiculous paws, the only dog I've ever known to snore like a tractor, was stretched on his back next to my chair, legs in the air, the way he always was when he was absolutely content. He froze like someone had hit pause on him. His ears went straight up. I tipped my head and followed his line of sight. Above the maple at the end of the yard, the stars looked wrong. Not brighter, not dimmer. Wrong the way a misplaced note sounds in a familiar song. A handful of them were no longer fixed points. They were sliding, slowly together like leaves drifting on a stream. The cluster moved as one, a tidy group, and it crossed the sky as if it had a route it'd practiced. At first I thought it might be satellites. I've watched those slow chains before. Phone constellations, I think, the neighborhood kids used to call them. But these weren't linear. They kept roughly the same distance between each other, like they were keeping formation. And they moved in a curve that was too smooth to be aircraft at that altitude. The motion wasn't quick. It took maybe 3 minutes for the cluster to drift from the maple over toward the old radio tower to the south. When it stopped, the group sat in a new arrangement, one of those small, dumb rearrangements that makes your eye expect something to match, and it doesn't. Gus didn't budge from his belly. He nosed his head under the porch step and wouldn't come out even when I whistled. That was the first real skin prickle moment. My dog, who will fetch a lawn chair for an audience, refusing his own yard. Before the stars started moving, I had noticed a couple of other small wrong things, and I'm the kind of person who notices small wrong things. The radio in the kitchen that sits on the window shelf and plays oldies all the time had given a single thin burst of static that sounded almost like a voice, and then went quiet as if someone had taken the station away. The digital clock over the stove blinked 11:07, then skipped to 11:10 when I went in to get another beer. I told myself it was a power blip or the cheap clock losing its mind, and I left the porch light on for company. Those are the sensible explanations you reach for in the beginning. The dogs in the neighborhood went from their usual evening barks to a kind of high, single note, and then nothing. I noticed that because across the fence, old Mrs. Fenley's terrier, the one that yaps at our cat, usually keeps tenacious hours, and that night he cut off the same second Gus stared. The sounds snapped off like the world had been muted a notch. The breeze that had been moving the maple leaves died out. The night pressed closer, lighter somehow. The stars shone plain. Then that handful of them glided. I tried to get a photo. I've got a decent phone, newer model, and it usually handles night sky pictures better than I do. My thumb fumbled and my screen filled with a little spinning circle of loading for a beat, and then the camera app closed. I opened it again, and the image I took came out like a smear. More like someone had taken Vaseline to the lens than anything actually captured. Same thing when I pointed Gus's little LED collar at the sky. The collar made a weak halo on the porch wood but did nothing to the moving points above. The stars didn't respond to light. The cluster paused, and then, without looking like they accelerated, the stones in the sky shifted again and rearranged themselves into a line that wasn't a line, and then a compact shape. Not a picture I knew. They settled like someone had set them down with a finger. I felt the urge to stand up and call somebody, because that's what you do when your brain wants proof. But I also felt the opposite urge. To stay perfectly still in the middle of a familiar backyard and watch what your eyes were telling you. My watch, cheap wristwatch, battery a year old, showed 11:14 when the stars began moving, and because I compulsively check it in a night like this, 11:17 when they stopped. I remembered the radio clock skipping earlier, and I told myself the watch was wrong. Later I checked the microwave and it said 11:14, and the app on my phone, once it stopped gyrating, agreed. Time felt one of those elastic things for a minute, the way a dream stretches an hour into a second. I didn't black out. I noted the seconds. The stitch was small but visible, like thread that doesn't quite match the rest of the cloth. Neighbors came out, not a lot, just the people who sleep with their windows open or keep their barbecue lights on. A half dozen heads poked from porches along the street, and we did that shapeless communal thing. We squinted up, said, "You seeing this?" and nodded at each other like we were all seeing the same hallucination and willing it into common sense. Nobody seemed afraid enough to call the police. The sort of wrongness that could be filed under weird but not urgent crept up the street. When the cluster stopped, one of the stars wobbled a little and brightened, and for a second I thought it might be a meteor. It steadied though, and the brightness subsided. The new arrangement looked deliberate, like an arrangement someone had designed to be seen but not explained. I thought about how small we are under the sky, and how that fact doesn't change the teeth of the feeling. You can say it's awe, and that's fine and true, but there's something else, a hush that sits over your skin. Gus stayed under the porch. He let me come close and scratch his neck, but when I reached for the leash, he shifted deeper back into shadow and put his big chin on a step and refused. He wuffed softly and wrapped his paws over the top one like he was holding on. I ended up letting the leash drag behind a shoe because I couldn't make him stand. He trembled once and then was still again. He looked at me like he was deciding whether or not to trust his person. I decided to go next door and ask Mrs. Fenley if she'd seen anything. On the walk over there, the streetlights blinked in a pattern, one small blink every 3 seconds, then steady. The light pattern made me think of an old theater sign. She opened her door and let me stand in the porch light, the kind of solid lamp that made everyone's faces too white, and when I asked if she'd seen it, she nodded, slow. "They were moving," she said. "Not like anything I recall. My Harold," she tapped her chest where she keeps his wedding ring in a pocket. "He called it a dance, said not to worry." She paused, like she'd reconsidered something unsaid, and then added, "But Rufus wouldn't go out to pee all night. Wouldn't even look at the yard." Her terrier was, she said, trembling in a corner behind the fern. I told her Gus was on my porch, and she seemed to think that made sense, as if animals were tuned into a channel we barely hear. We went back to our yards. The cluster had rearranged again into a pattern I didn't have words for, like a constellation someone had redrafted for a different sky. My phone on the kitchen counter finally got a text from my sister. "You outside? My feed is wild." And when I opened it, there were a handful of clip messages from other friends saying they'd been watching too. Not everyone had seen them. Not everyone wanted to talk about it. The ones who did used a lot of the same phrasing, like a handful moved together. The dogs went funny. I tried to get more pictures. The second attempt, the camera app behaved like it had something loaded. It didn't want to show me. A buffer loop of black frames and one where a pale smear crossed the image and then the file corrupted. I uploaded the corrupted file to a cloud thing on autopilot and the upload failed. It was small, inconvenient technology failing, but it always feels like proof's the first thing to go when the world flexes. By midnight, the neighbors had drifted back indoors. Lights turned off one by one. Music behind windows started up again. The street resumed its quiet, the air a little cooler than before. Gus stayed under the porch. I brought him a blanket from inside and set it down near his head. He let me lay it and then folded himself deeper into the shadow. I sat for a long time after that, not sure whether I was waiting for anything or hoping nothing else would happen. The cluster eventually dispersed. The stars returned to their regular, gorgeous, stubborn points. The night did what nights always do. It let you think there's continuity again. Gus didn't move until dawn. He did come back into the house when Jenna's alarm went off next morning. She came over after my wife told her I'd seen something strange, and he trotted in like nothing was wrong. He slept nearly all day the way dogs do after a long night. I did what people do in these situations. I told the story in pieces to Mrs. Fenley, to Jenna, to a coworker who raised his eyes and said, "Huh, weird," and then to my wife when she came home that afternoon. We walked the yard at dusk the next night, us all looking up, and nothing repeated. The maple's leaves turned, the streetlights hummed in their usual way, and the sprinklers kept to their schedule. There's no tidy ending. Gus will sleep on the porch sometimes now when the evening smells like rain, but he never stretches fully out under the stars like he used to. He keeps one eye open, and if I glance up at the sky and see a pattern that's just slightly off, one that might be a plane, or it might be a group of satellites, or it might be nothing, my first instinct is to hunch my shoulders and call him in. The memory of the stars moving stays like a small ache in the back of my throat, easy to ignore until something else nudges it. I make coffee in the mornings, check the clocks, and go to work. Life holds its edges in place. The dog lies under the porch and watches, and that feels like reason enough to look up. I had finished lunch around 1 that afternoon and decided to walk up to Arthur's Seat. The sky was clear, a pale winter blue, and the city had that quiet, washed-out feeling you get just after snow melts. I usually take my camera when I go up there, just to catch shots of the city from the hill. It's one of those things that's more habit than hobby, but I like having something tangible to remember the day by. I was halfway up the trail when I noticed it. Bright, hovering just above the eastern slope. Not moving, not blinking, just there. My first thought was a drone or one of those new weather balloons they've been talking about on the news, but it didn't behave like either. It was perfectly still, symmetrical, and somehow it didn't reflect the sunlight the way the hill or the buildings did. I lifted my camera and snapped a few shots, holding my breath to make sure the focus was sharp. I watched for a few more minutes, but it stayed put. The city noise seemed to fade into background hum, and there was this odd stillness around me, like the air had gotten thicker. Then I blinked, and it was gone. Just gone. No motion, no fade, nothing. I kept taking pictures as I walked back down, hoping to catch some trace of it in the frame. Later at home, I went through the photos on my computer. There it was in several shots, bright and clearly visible above the trees, just like I'd seen it. I zoomed in, adjusted contrast and exposure, and every time it popped back into view on the screen. I didn't tell anyone about it, at least not right away. The next morning, I got into the office early. My workplace is small, one of those independent design studios in the old town, the kind with exposed brick and creaky floors. I had just booted up my computer when the door opened. 2 men in suits stepped in. Black suits, white shirts, ties that weren't patterned. Shoes shined so much they caught the morning light and sent it glinting across the floor. "Good morning," the taller one said, voice even, measured. "We need to inspect your camera for errors." I froze. My camera? I hadn't left it anywhere unusual. What?" I said. He nodded at the bag on my desk. "Please." I reached for it, and he stepped closer, silent, expressionless. The shorter one didn't say anything, just scanned the office, the eyes moving in a way that made it feel like they were measuring everything. The distance between my desk and the window, the angles of the monitors, the layout of the room. I didn't want to hand over the camera, but there was a strange weight in the air that made me comply. They handled it quickly, turning the lens this way and that, pressing buttons, but not in a way that seemed normal. I noticed that whenever I tried to look at the screen or viewfinder, they would subtly shift, blocking my line of sight. After a few minutes, they nodded at each other. "Errors noted," the taller man said. "That will suffice." Then, just like that, they left. No goodbye, no explanation, no footprints in the dusty floor. I sat there staring at the door, my heart racing, waiting for some rational follow-up that never came. I went straight home after work and checked the photos again. The object was gone. Every image that had shown it clearly the day before now had an empty sky, normal clouds, the sun in the same position, but no bright shape hovering above the slope. I tried opening the raw files, different programs, even my memory card in another computer. Every time, it was missing. I thought maybe I had misremembered. Maybe my mind had filled in the object where there wasn't one, but the original files I'd copied to my backup drive the night before had been intact, showing the object clearly. Now even those were gone. The folder was still there, images all accounted for, but the one frame with the object had changed. I called my friend Mark, who's a hobbyist photographer, just to confirm I wasn't going crazy. I described the photos, the object, everything. He was skeptical, of course. Maybe a lens flare, he said. I laughed it off at first, but deep down I didn't think it could be explained that way. The next week, I kept noticing odd things. Black cars parked near the studio that I hadn't seen before, always with darkened windows. Figures in long coats at the end of the street, standing perfectly still, watching, then disappearing when I looked directly at them. I tried to rationalize it, tell myself it was coincidence, paranoia, maybe the city just had weird shadows and people who didn't move much. But the weight of the camera incident, the missing object, the silence of the men in black, it made rational explanations feel thin. One night, I went back up Arthur's Seat. I just wanted to see the place again, to ground myself, maybe catch another shot, and prove I wasn't imagining anything. The city lights twinkled below, the mist rolling in patches along the hills. I kept the camera ready, eyes scanning. Nothing appeared, no bright shape, no drone, no flare, but the feeling of being watched was back, subtle but persistent. Every shadow at the edge of my vision seemed exaggerated. Every slight movement in the fog felt like an intrusion. Since then, I haven't left my camera unattended in the office or at home. I don't talk about the incident much, because there's no way to make it make sense. Sometimes I still look at the backup files, hoping the object will reappear, hoping some error reversed itself. It never does. I can't explain why they came or why the photos changed, only that they did. The men in black, if that's what they were, never returned, but I keep an eye out anyway. On clear days, when the city stretches below me and the wind cuts across the hill, I wonder if something's up there, or watching from the mist, keeping tabs. It's a small, quiet dread, the kind that doesn't scream but lingers, settling in your chest in a way that makes you second-guess the ordinary. I keep taking photos. I keep climbing the hill. But I know that some things, once noticed, never entirely leave you alone. It was late November, a cold, damp kind of night where everything smells faintly of wet tarmac and chimney smoke. My girlfriend at the time, Claire, had just moved into a small terrace house near the outskirts of Dundee. I'd been helping her unpack boxes all evening, and by the time we finished, it was after midnight. Her street was one of those short residential ones, with a dead end. Old brick houses, narrow pavements, and a single orange streetlight at the corner. We stepped outside to get some air and smoke before heading to bed. It was strangely quiet. Usually you'd hear at least a distant car on the main road or a dog barking, but it was just still. Claire lit her cigarette and nudged me to look up. Over the rooftops, not far above, there was a shape, triangular, perfectly still, no sound. 3 points of white light marked its corners, with a faint red glow in the middle. It wasn't huge, but it was close enough that we could make out the edges, darker than the night sky. The whole thing just hung there, motionless. We whispered to each other without really thinking about why we were whispering. Claire fumbled for her phone, but by the time she unlocked it, the screen stayed black, like the camera wouldn't pick it up. She tried twice, then gave up. As we watched, the red glow at the center pulsed once, then the corner lights blinked. 1, 2, 3, each in turn, like running lights on a stage. It did that twice, then everything went dark. There was no movement when it disappeared, no sudden speed or upward climb. It just wasn't there anymore. We stood there for a while, shivering, staring at the empty sky. Eventually, Claire muttered, "Let's just go inside." Neither of us slept properly that night. We didn't tell anyone. Not her neighbors, not our families. We didn't even talk about it much between ourselves after that first night. A week later, we were at the bus stop down by the high street. It was early evening, maybe 6, already dark. It had been drizzling, and the pavement was slick under the streetlights. The stop was empty, except for us. That's when the man walked up. He came from the opposite direction of the main road, hands in the pockets of a black overcoat. Underneath, you could see the edge of a black suit, white shirt, black tie. He wasn't wearing a hat or gloves, even though it was cold. His hair was neatly parted and he was clean-shaven. He didn't say hello or ask for the time. He stopped a few feet away, looked directly at us, first at Claire, then at me, and asked, very clearly, "Did the lights blink in sequence?" It took me a second to realize what he'd said. Claire blinked at him and opened her mouth, but before she could answer, he turned and walked away. Not quickly, not nervously, just turned and strolled back the way he'd come, his shoes clicking on the wet pavement. He didn't look back. We sat there frozen for a few seconds. The bus came and went without us getting on. When we finally spoke, all Claire said was, "How did he know?" After that, little things started to bother us. One evening, I was leaving Claire's and saw a black car parked at the end of her street. Engine off, windows tinted. The driver's silhouette was barely visible. When I walked toward it, the car started and rolled away slowly, not speeding, just moving off like it had been waiting for something. Claire said her landline rang twice late at night that week, but when she picked up, nobody was there. She thought she heard faint clicking on the other end, like an old tape recorder. Another night, I woke up on her sofa and saw light through the curtains, white, bright, but no sound of an engine. By the time I pulled the curtain back, the street was empty. We never saw the triangular craft again. We didn't see the man again either, not directly. But once, standing at the same bus stop a couple of weeks later, I noticed a tall figure at the far end of the street under a lamp. Black coat, hands in pockets, not moving. When a bus went past and blocked my view for a second, he was gone. I tried to reason it out. Maybe it was some new kind of drone. Maybe the man had overheard us talking somewhere, but it didn't add up. We'd been completely alone when we saw the craft. We hadn't told a soul. The only people who knew were me and Claire, and she swore she hadn't mentioned it to anyone. By January, she moved again, closer to the city center. The car stopped showing up after that. The phone calls stopped too. We never got an explanation for any of it. But whenever I wait for a bus at night now, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting a man in a black suit to ask me another question I won't know how to answer. I just passed the playground, the one with the rusted swing set and the concrete path curling around the pond when I noticed it. Or maybe I didn't notice it at first. I just felt it, like the air itself had grown heavier, tighter around my chest. My name's Laura Kinney. I usually run the same loop every night through Eastwood Park, and I've never been a fan of the dark or fog, but it had been a long day and I needed to clear my head. The fog that night was thick, rolling in from the north end of the park, curling around the oak trees like it had a mind of its own. I slowed my pace, trying not to let my imagination run wild. That's when I saw the shadows. Not like normal shadows cast from the streetlights that flickered along the trail, but darker, denser, moving in the periphery of my vision. Every time I turned my head, trying to catch them, they were gone. I stopped and stood in the middle of the path, chest heaving from the run, but also from something else. There was a faint rustling, like leaves brushing together, but I couldn't tell if it was the wind or something else. My flashlight app on my phone was dead. I'd forgotten to charge it, so I was running blind except for the pale halo of light around the street lamps. I told myself I was imagining it, that my brain was just tired. I'd been working late and my mind was probably playing tricks. I started jogging again, slower this time, trying to keep my eyes focused straight ahead. But I could feel it, the prickling at the back of my neck, the weight of something just out of view following. Every turn I made, every time I looped around a tree or a patch of brush, it felt like the space behind me stretched and shifted, as if someone or something was keeping pace without ever making a sound. I passed the pond, and that's when it got worse. The fog hung low over the water, blurring the reflections of the lampposts. My shadow stretched on the path, but I could swear there was another shadow, detached from mine, gliding across the edge of the water. I stopped, heart hammering. There was nothing there when I looked directly, just the empty pond and the mist curling off the surface. But when I turned back, straightened my gaze to the path again, I caught a flicker at the edge of my vision. A dark figure ducking behind a tree, or maybe just a trick of the fog. I tried to shake it off and started walking, slower, my sneakers crunching on wet leaves. The park is small, and I should have been close to the northern exit by then, but it felt like I was going in circles. Every time I thought I recognized a section of path, it didn't look quite right. Branches where there hadn't been branches, puddles where the ground had been dry. My sense of direction was slipping, even though I've run this loop hundreds of times. Then I heard it. A low, barely there sound, like soft scraping, like someone dragging their fingertips across bark. I froze, listening. The sound stopped immediately. My breath was loud in my ears. I turned slowly, scanning the fog-shrouded trees. Nothing. The park was silent. I convinced myself it had been a branch rubbing the wind, but my stomach didn't buy it. I started jogging again, faster this time. I couldn't tell if I was being followed or if I'd just been spooked into paranoia. My hands were cold. My heart was racing. And then the shadows returned, tiny, flickering at the corner of my vision, darting between trees. I caught a glimpse once, maybe a second, and it looked off. Not human, not entirely. Too thin, too elongated, like the silhouette of a person stretched wrong. But when I turned to look, of course, nothing was there. I reached the northern edge of the park, where the path meets the street. The fog thinned slightly, and the familiar glow of the street lamps greeted me. Relief surged, but so did confusion. The sense of being watched didn't leave, even under the yellow light. I looked back toward the park, into the swirling gray, and the shadows seemed gone. But the air felt heavier, like a weight had lifted but hadn't disappeared. I kept running, moving faster now, until I reached my apartment. I locked the door behind me, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. That happens sometimes, I told myself. Late night runs, fog, overworked brain. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Even standing in my apartment, lights on, windows closed, I felt it pressing against the edges of perception, as if it had followed me all the way in, but stayed just out of sight. Over the next few days, I tried going back to the park. During the day, everything was normal. Children playing, joggers running, dogs barking. Nothing seemed out of place. But I avoided running at night. I couldn't bring myself to see it again, not with the fog and the trees and that feeling that I wasn't alone. Sometimes, though, when I close my eyes at night, I see it again. The flicker at the corner of vision, the elongated shapes that vanish the moment I look directly. I hear that faint scraping sound in my head like fingernails on bark, and every time I wonder if I'll ever understand it. Or if it's still out there watching, waiting, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I've never told anyone this before, not friends, not family. They'd laugh, say I was imagining things, that fog and exhaustion make the mind play tricks. Maybe they're right, but I know what I saw or felt and I can't explain it. Every time I walk past that park during the day, the hairs on my arms raise and I feel that same weight at my back. Something's there. I just can't see it. And maybe that's exactly what it wants. The fog was thick that morning, crawling over the harbor like it was trying to smother everything. I'd gotten there around 4 a.m. earlier than usual, but something about the way the tide looked in the half-light made me grab my gear and head down to the docks. My old aluminum skiff was already tied to the pier, bobbing gently against the posts. Everything smelled like salt and wet wood, the kind of damp that sticks to your jacket and gloves. I set out into the quiet water, paddling slowly so I didn't disturb anything. The harbor was empty except for a few moored boats, their outlines swallowed by the fog. Normally by this time, gulls were already circling, squawking over whatever scraps had washed in overnight. Today, nothing. Complete silence except for the occasional drip of water off the hull. I was a little uneasy, but I pushed it aside. Some mornings are just quiet. I paddled out toward the deeper channel where the fish usually start moving, keeping my flashlight handy. It was one of those cheap handhelds with a dim beam, but enough to catch a bobber or a bit of reflection on the water. Then I saw it. A faint glow, just above the water, moving erratically. Not bouncing like a reflection, really, but it seemed to float, hopping slightly like it was rolling on an invisible wave. My first thought was a buoy light, but there was nothing there. No chain, no post, nothing that could explain it. I stopped paddling, letting the boat drift a little, and stared. The lights, there were 3 of them now, moved in a loose line, sliding over the surface. They didn't make any sound, didn't ripple the water. It was eerie. I raised my flashlight, pointing it toward the lights, hoping maybe someone else had put out lanterns or something along the channel. The lights disappeared. Just like that. Not fading, not sinking, nothing. 1 second they were there, and the next the water was smooth again, glassy, fog swallowing everything. I blinked and swung the flashlight side to side. The harbor looked normal, but the fog made it hard to tell. No movement. No sign that anything had even been there. I tried to convince myself it was the reflection of a dock light somewhere, some optical quirk. But I knew the harbor well. There were no lights on that part of the channel, not that early. My chest tightened. I paddled slowly forward, ears straining for any sound. The fog muffled everything, and the usual creaks of the wooden pier were absent. Even the gulls hadn't shown. A few minutes later, I saw it again. A single point of pale light low over the water, bouncing gently, almost like it was trying to follow me. I froze. My hands clenched the paddle, and I forced myself to take a breath. I didn't move the boat. The light shifted slightly, almost lazily, not aggressive. Not fast, just there. I raised the flashlight again, hand shaking slightly. The light vanished instantly, the water returning to its normal dark reflection of the fog. I could see the faint ripples from my paddling, the mist hanging over the harbor, everything normal, except I felt the kind of cold awareness you get when something isn't right, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stayed where I was, scanning. Nothing. The harbor was still. Even the boat seemed quieter, as if it didn't want to touch the water. I paddled closer to the pier, slowly keeping my eyes on the fog. There was a faint sense of movement out there. Subtle, maybe just shadows shifting, but I couldn't be sure. The fog played tricks. Once I reached the pier, I tied the skiff and climbed out, shivering even though I was wearing layers. I walked along the dock, flashlight cutting through the fog, looking for anything unusual. No footprints, no floating debris, nothing. Just wet wood and low mist. I leaned on the railing, staring out at the water, and that's when I noticed the harbor lights from the town across the bay. Usually they threw long reflections across the water, but now the reflections were broken, flickering strangely as if the fog itself was bending the light. I felt a sudden unease, like I was being watched, though there was no one there. The gulls started up finally, a few lazy cries, wings brushing the water as they landed. The normal sounds returned gradually, but I kept my flashlight ready, scanning the foggy channel. The harbor looked calm, normal again, yet I couldn't shake the memory of those lights. I stayed a while longer, drifting in my skiff, but nothing reappeared. Not the bouncing lights, not the flickers. The fog began lifting slightly as the sun started to edge over the horizon. I paddled back to shore slowly, keeping my eyes on the water, half expecting the lights to show again. They didn't. The harbor looked ordinary, almost mundane, but something had been out there, moving over the water, unseen and silent. When I got back to the dock, I sat on the edge, boots dangling over the water, and let myself breathe. I thought about calling someone, a friend who fishes in the harbor sometimes, but the rational part of me kept saying I'd imagine it. Fog plays tricks, the mind wakes too early. But I knew what I'd seen. The pattern, the movement, the way the lights vanished the instant I shone the flashlight. It wasn't ordinary. I packed up slowly, dragging my skiff back to its usual spot. The fog had mostly lifted, the harbor now bright with early morning sun. I kept looking back over the water as I loaded my gear, half expecting something to reappear. Nothing. Just the ordinary docks, moored boats, gulls diving for breakfast. On the drive home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, scanning the harbor in the distance. Everything looked normal, mundane even, yet I could still picture those pale lights floating silently over the water, vanishing when I tried to find them. The memory pressed against the back of my mind like the weight of fog itself. Real, unexplained, and untraceable. By the time I reached my apartment, sunlight was breaking fully over the town. the harbor now bright and alive with morning activity. I made coffee, stared out the window at the bay, and tried to shake it off. But I haven't stopped thinking about it. Every foggy morning now, every early shift, I remember the silence, the floating lights, and the way the water seemed too still, too calm, as if something had passed over it and then left, leaving me the only witness. Even now, when the harbor fog rolls in again, I glance toward the channel, flashlight ready in hand out of habit, half hoping and half dreading. Nothing appears, but I know it was there, moving over the water, waiting, or maybe just passing, completely silent and completely gone before I could understand it. I was crouched behind a fallen oak, the early evening fog settling in low between the pines when I first saw it. A pale, pulsing glow, weaving between the trees maybe 100 yards out. I froze, barely breathing, listening to the soft rustle of leaves and my own heartbeat. The light didn't move like a person walking or a flashlight beam. It danced, weaving in smooth curves, sometimes slowing, sometimes speeding up, never touching the ground. At first, I thought it might be another hunter, someone out too late, maybe with a small lantern, but the motion didn't match anything human. It slipped silently through the woods, no crunch of twigs or brush, just this soft, almost liquid glow. I tried to track it with my eyes, adjusting my position to get a better look, but the fog made everything blurry. I lifted my rifle slowly, scope first, trying to get a closer view. That's when it vanished. One moment it was there, weaving just above the underbrush. The next, nothing. The space it had occupied seemed empty, but the fog hung heavy and my pulse started to hammer against my ribs. I lowered the rifle, scanning in a tight circle, ears straining for anything unusual. For a minute, nothing. Then I noticed the sound, or maybe the lack of it. All the usual forest noises had gone quiet. Birds that normally called as the sun set, frogs along the creek, even the wind through the pine needles, all gone. Complete silence, heavier than any night I'd ever spent out here. I felt exposed, like I was the only living thing in a still painting. I moved slowly, rifle raised, trying to get closer to where I'd last seen the glow. As I stepped over a root, a small flicker caught my eye. Just a glint of white light bouncing off something wet on a branch. I froze, trying to make sense of it, then realized it wasn't the same as before. It was static. A reflection maybe, but it made the hairs on my neck stand up. I kept moving, careful to stay in the shadows, following the direction I thought the light had gone. After 10 minutes, I stumbled onto a clearing. Nothing but fog and pines, and my flashlight beam cutting a narrow swath in front of me. I checked my watch. About 20 minutes had passed since I first saw the glow. That seemed off. I could have sworn only a few minutes had gone by, but the sky had darkened further, and the temperature had dropped noticeably. I leaned against a tree, trying to calm myself, when I noticed something odd. Tiny points of light, almost like embers, flickered in the fog ahead. They weren't moving like fireflies. They stayed in place, then blinked out one by one. I counted 3 before my flashlight battery buzzed low and dimmed, forcing me to switch it to a weaker setting. That's when I felt it. Not behind me, not to the side, but a sense of being watched. Nothing I could see, just awareness, as if something was tracking my movements carefully. I adjusted my grip on the rifle, feeling the weight of it steady my nerves, and started moving back toward the path. As I did, the fog thickened unnaturally, and the faint pulsing light reappeared for a brief second between 2 thick pines. I froze, scope up again, but as soon as I tried to focus, it vanished. The silence pressed in closer, and I realized I couldn't hear even the usual nighttime creaks of the forest floor under my own boots. I kept walking, slow, deliberate, staying alert. My mind raced through explanations. A strange reflection of the moon, bioluminescent insects, some kind of trick of fog and branches, but none of it fit. The way the light had moved, the absence of sound, the pressure of being watched. All wrong for anything natural I knew. By the time I got back to the main logging trail, I was shaking, but I told myself to stay rational. Maybe someone else was out here with a laser pointer or some toy. Maybe I just imagined parts of it, my eyes playing tricks in the fog. I even laughed quietly to myself, trying to break the tension. I kept checking behind me as I hiked back to the truck. Everything looked normal, shadows long and straight, fog thick but ordinary, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the light, whatever it was, had followed me in some way. I slowed every time a branch snapped underfoot, listening, expecting, but nothing. The truck came into view, headlights dim in the fog. I approached cautiously, scanning the tree line one last time. Nothing moved. I unlocked the door and got inside, leaving the engine off at first, just listening. The silence outside pressed against the glass, heavy and deliberate, like the woods were holding their breath. When I started the engine, the vibration of the idling motor seemed loud in contrast to the quiet. I looked in the rearview mirror at the fog-shrouded trees and couldn't see a thing, but I had the sensation that the glow was still out there somewhere, just beyond the edge of my vision. Driving out of the woods, I kept glancing at the side mirrors and over the roof, half expecting to see it again, weaving between the trees. But the path back was empty, the fog thinning, the forest returning to ordinary sounds. Birds called from the treetops, a distant branch cracked, a small owl hooted, normal again. When I reached my driveway, headlights cutting a path across the snow-dusted yard, I hesitated before stepping inside. My dog barked from the living room, breaking the tension, and I laughed, though it was shaky. I told myself it was just the fog, the fatigue, maybe a mix of imagination and stress from a long day hunting. I still think about it. Sometimes when I'm hiking, or even just sitting on the porch, I swear I see a flicker in the woods, subtle, just at the edge of sight. Not constant, not obvious, but enough to make me glance over my shoulder and feel that same watchful pressure. I've gone back to the woods since then. I bring a friend sometimes, lights, radios, even extra rifles. Nothing shows up in the same way. The fog is normal, the trees sound like themselves, and I feel almost foolish remembering that night. But every so often, in the right misty conditions, I catch a pulse of white moving against the dark trunks and my stomach tightens. And I know, in a way I can't explain, that whatever it was, it's still out there, weaving silently through the trees. I woke up to the cold light of morning cutting through my blinds, the kind of gray that makes everything feel muted. At first, I thought my little brother had been up and pressed his hands to the window, but the prints were too small and delicate. I rubbed my eyes and leaned closer. They were thin, like someone's fingers had barely touched the glass, trailing downward in a pattern that made me uneasy. I live on the edge of a small town in Vermont. Our backyard is big, sloping, and backs up to a dense patch of woods that I've been warned never to wander alone after dark. I went to the window, squinting against the dim light, and saw the prints continued onto the siding, then toward the edge of the yard. They disappeared at the tree line. I froze, my stomach knotting. There was no one else in the house. My parents were out early for work, and my little brother Jamie was still asleep in the next room. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone, debating whether to go outside. The air smelled damp, earthy, faintly metallic, like rain had just soaked the soil. I stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking under my feet, and shone the light on the yard. At first, nothing. Just wet grass and shadows of trees stretching long and thin. Then I saw them. Tiny depressions in the soil, faint but there. Footprints. Small, narrow, impossibly straight lines heading into the woods. My hand shook on the flashlight. My brain tried to rationalize a stray animal, someone playing a prank. But the prints were so precise, delicate, almost human. And there was something about the rhythm. They weren't just walking. They were deliberate, measured, like each step was calculated. I called out softly, "Hello?" No answer, just a whisper of wind through the pines. I stepped onto the grass, following the prints cautiously. They led to the edge of the woods, and then nothing. The soil ahead was undisturbed, except for a faint circle of flattened leaves that didn't match any natural pattern. I shone the flashlight over it. No sign of movement, no tracks leading deeper. I wanted to turn back, but curiosity pushed me forward a few feet into the trees. The forest smelled of wet pine and moss. My flashlight caught glimmers of spider webs, wet leaves, and the occasional fallen branch. Then something made me stop. A sound, soft, high-pitched, like a vibration in the air, almost humming. I couldn't tell if it was coming from the trees or inside my head. I spun around. Nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. The prints hadn't reappeared, but the circle of flattened leaves seemed wrong. It looked pressed from the inside out, as if someone had knelt there carefully. I shined my light around, and for a moment I thought I saw movement. A shimmer, like heat over pavement, but the air was cold. My stomach sank. I turned back toward the yard. That's when I noticed the first real impossibility. My porch light, always left on overnight, was off. I was certain I had flipped it before going to bed. My flashlight shook as I held it higher. Behind me, among the trees, the shadows didn't match the branches. One shadow stretched taller than the tallest pine, thin, unnaturally straight, tilting slightly as if observing me. I backed up quickly, tripping over a root, and the shadow didn't move like a person would. It just stayed there, looming. My brain screamed, telling me to run. I didn't. I just froze, staring, trying to tell myself it was a trick of the morning light, fog clinging low between the trees. Then the humming rose, low and vibrating like a tuning fork pressed against my ribs. The air in front of me seemed to ripple. I blinked, and for a moment I swear the forest bent warped like I was looking through thick water. The shadow was gone, but the circle of flattened leaves had a new mark. Tiny grooves like scratches leading toward me, toward the yard. I ran, heart hammering, flashlight bouncing in my hand. When I reached the porch, I slammed the door and locked it, leaning against it, gasping. Jamie stirred in the next room. I told him to stay in bed, not wanting to explain what I'd seen. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Did you get up early? Coffee's on the counter." I didn't answer. I just sat in the kitchen, staring out the window at the woods. The fingerprints weren't visible from inside, but the hum lingered faintly, like it had seeped into the walls. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every sound outside, the creak of a branch, a distant crow, the wind, made me jump. By morning, the prints on the window were gone. The small depressions in the grass had disappeared. The circle of flattened leaves, normal again. The forest looked untouched, ordinary. I told no one. My parents wouldn't have understood, and Jamie would have laughed it off. But the next night I checked the window again, and faint marks had returned. Not identical, but close. Thin, delicate. I pressed my palm against the glass, trying to compare them to mine. They didn't match. I started noticing other things, small and strange. Objects in my room slightly shifted. My backpack sometimes ended up on the chair instead of the floor. My alarm clock, always at 6:30, blinked different numbers, like it had reset itself. Sometimes when I lay in bed, I could hear that hum again, barely audible, vibrating through the walls. I tried to catch a glimpse outside at night using the porch light. Nothing. The forest stayed still, but the feeling of being watched, of being observed, never left. Sometimes I thought I saw flashes, white, smooth, fast, moving between the trees. No shape, no sound, just a flicker. One evening, I followed the prints again. They appeared starting from the window, leading into the yard, then toward the forest. I hesitated at the edge, thinking back to the shimmer, the hum, the impossible shadow. My legs felt heavy, my chest tight. I wanted to run, to stop noticing, but I needed to understand. I stepped forward a few feet, and nothing. The forest was normal, but when I turned back, the footprints were gone. And on the porch, etched into the wooden railing, were tiny scratches, like someone had leaned on it from the outside. I haven't gone back into the woods at night since. I keep a flashlight by my bed and check the window before sleeping. The fingerprints reappear every few nights, always small, thin, deliberate. The hum comes and goes. Sometimes I catch glimpses of movement among the trees, or a flicker of light so fast it disappears if I blink. I don't know who or what it is. I don't know why it's interested in me. But I feel it, watching, waiting, patient. And every time I look out that window, I remember the prints leading into the woods and vanishing halfway through the trees. I live with the question now. Every day, when it comes back, will it be just footprints, or will it want more? I woke up to the sound of silence, or at least the kind of silence that feels different from normal quiet. It wasn't the absence of noise exactly. It was a pressure, like the house had been pressed into some thick, still air. I rolled over, squinting at the glow of the alarm clock on the nightstand, and it was stuck on 2:03 a.m. I frowned, reached over, unplugged it, and shook it a little. Nothing. The time didn't change. At first, I thought maybe a power surge had fried the clocks. I had 2 wall clocks in the living room, a digital timer on the oven, even my phone, and every single one was frozen at 2:03. I grabbed my phone anyway. Nothing. Screen lit, battery fine, but the time didn't move. My stomach turned over a little. I looked out the window. The street lights were on, the faint orange glow behind the trees like it should be normal, but something felt off. I slipped on some slippers and stepped outside. The air was thick, humid, a little sticky. I walked to the end of the driveway, and the neighborhood was quiet, too still. The leaves on the trees didn't move. A dog that normally barked somewhere a few houses down was absolutely silent. I shouted just to hear something back, but my voice didn't seem to carry. It sounded like it did, but the sound didn't bounce, didn't echo, like it existed in its own bubble. I walked further, across the street, stepping onto the sidewalk. Everything was frozen. Cars in driveways looked normal, but there were no little movements, no flickers. I waved my hand in front of a street lamp, and the light didn't catch on it like it should. It was eerie in a way that didn't make sense. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through syrup, but the pavement was smooth. I tried my phone again. Still 203. I tapped the screen, turned it over in my hands, tried calling out anything, but the world stayed in this weird paused state. Birds should have been chirping, a breeze should have stirred the trees, even a distant hum of a refrigerator. Nothing. I walked down the block, just looking, trying to see if maybe this was some kind of hallucination. The moon was visible behind thin clouds, and for a second I thought I saw a faint shimmer on the horizon, like heat waves bending the air, but it didn't make sense for a summer night like this. I rubbed my eyes, blinked, and it didn't go away. Then I noticed the shadows. Everything had shadows like it should, but they didn't change with me moving. My own shadow stretched along the sidewalk, but the moment I moved, it didn't shift like normal. It stayed put, anchored to the pavement. I felt a cold prickling in my neck, like someone or something was watching from just beyond my field of vision. I turned quickly. Nothing. I walked a little further down the street, reaching the corner where the woods began behind the houses. I had no reason to go there, but my legs moved without thought. The air there was thicker, colder. I could see the tree line clearly, though normally it would be darker. The shimmer from before was stronger now, a faint glow, almost white, hovering behind the trees. It didn't pulse, didn't move like a firefly. It just hovered. I blinked, trying to focus. And when I opened my eyes again, everything had moved. The streetlights flickered, the leaves rustled, a car down the street hummed past. I checked my watch. 5:04 a.m., 3 hours gone. I had no memory of walking, no memory of anything between stepping outside and that moment. I stumbled back home, heart hammering, mind spinning. Everything inside looked exactly as I had left it. The clocks running normally again. The alarm clock ticked over to 2:04, but my phone was correct. I checked the bedroom, the living room, even the kitchen. No signs of anything unusual. No footprints in the grass from where I walked, nothing disturbed. For the next few days, I couldn't shake it. I kept checking the clocks, counting seconds, trying to see if I could notice any lag, any pause. Nothing. Friends told me it sounded like a weird dream, maybe sleepwalking, but I was too conscious of what was happening to be asleep. I remembered every step of waking up, unplugging clocks, walking outside, except for the 3 hours in between. I drove past the woods that night just to see if I could find the shimmer again. Nothing. The trees looked normal, the air normal. I even spent the next week walking the street late at night, hoping for a repeat, but the world moved normally, like always. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had blacked out without realizing it. Maybe some unknown environmental factor had caused sensory hallucinations. But I still can't explain how my legs carried me down the block without conscious thought. How the world appeared paused, how shadows refused to move. I sleep with the blinds closed now, and I avoid stepping outside at night if I can help it. I've driven past the woods in daylight, and even then, there's a nagging sense of the shimmer, like it's always there just beyond perception. My clocks have never stopped again. My life has continued as normal, but I feel like a part of time stayed behind that night, in that frozen 3 hours, waiting for me to remember it. I don't know if it was alien or some strange phenomenon of the earth I can't comprehend, but I remember it. I remember the pause. I remember stepping into a world that wasn't mine and coming back 3 hours later with nothing to show for it. And sometimes, when I glance at a clock late at night, I feel a tick in the back of my mind, a faint memory of a time that stopped, and I can't tell whether it's real or if I just imagined it. But I know I felt it. The 3 hours are gone, and yet they're not. The pause exists in some corner of my memory, some part of the night that I never really walked through, that I never really lived. And I still feel, just sometimes, that if I blink at the wrong moment, I'll find it again. It was the summer of 1956 when I bought the television. I'd saved up for months, sold off some extra hay, cut back on feed costs, and drove into town to buy one of those brand new black and white sets they were advertising in the paper. It was a Montgomery Ward model, the kind with the rounded screen and a polished wooden cabinet. My wife Clara had wanted one for a while, and I figured it was time. Out where we lived, 3 miles outside of Milburn, evenings were quiet. A set like that made us feel connected, like we weren't so far removed from the world. The night I'm thinking about, we'd finished supper and I'd settled into my chair. Clara washed dishes in the kitchen. The set was supposed to pick up 3 channels on a good night, though most evenings we only managed one clear picture. I remember turning the dial for the 7 program. The screen flickered and steadied, but it wasn't what I expected. Instead of the announcer, I saw a sky. That's what it looked like. A sky full of points of light, except they weren't still. They moved, slow at first, like drifting, then quicker, darting in little jumps across the screen. The picture was faint, washed out gray against darker gray, but clear enough that I knew I wasn't looking at normal reception static. I fiddled with the antenna, gave the side of the set a tap, even tried adjusting the contrast, but nothing changed. The image stayed, showing those lights swimming in and out of formation. "Clara," I called. "Come look at this." She came in, drying her hands on a towel, and stood behind me. "Is that the weather?" she asked, squinting. "No," I said. "Ain't no program looks like that." We watched for another minute. The lights seemed to arrange themselves in arcs, then scatter again, like minnows avoiding a shadow. A faint hum came from the set, not the normal buzz it gave off, but lower, like a wire strung too tight. Clara didn't like it. She told me to turn it off, but I didn't. Something about it held me there. A few minutes passed, and then, out the window, I heard the cows. They weren't bawling like they do when spooked, more like a low, restless sound altogether. I set the dial back to another channel, but the picture stayed the same, those lights crossing one another in the gray sky. Clara insisted I check the barn. I grabbed the lantern and headed out. The air was warm, heavy with the smell of clover and the faint sourness of manure. The barn doors were closed, but inside I found the cows, every last one of them, lined up in neat rows. Not milling about, not shifting from foot to foot, just standing. Perfectly straight, shoulder to shoulder, all facing north. For a moment, I just stood there, holding the lantern up high. Their eyes glinted in the light, unblinking, like glass marbles. I called out, waved my arms, clapped. Usually that stirred them, but nothing changed. Not one of them moved. I walked along the rows, brushing a flank here, patting a side there. They didn't even flick their ears. It was like they were waiting. The lantern made the shadows stretch long across the straw. My boots scuffed on the floor, and I realized the barn was quieter than I'd ever heard it. No shifting hooves, no swish of tails, not even breathing I could pick up. Just silence, thick and heavy. I backed toward the doors, heart hammering, and hurried to the house. Clara was waiting on the porch. She asked what was wrong, but when I told her, she wouldn't go see. She just shook her head, pale-faced, and said we should call Reverend Harding in the morning. When I went back inside, the television was still showing that same sky of lights. They'd moved into a curve now, almost like a crescent. Then the screen wavered, like the signal faltered, and for a second I thought I saw, well, I don't know what it was. A shape, maybe. A long, pale line against the gray, too straight to be part of the background. Then it vanished. I switched the set off. The hum lingered for a second, even after the picture went dark. That night I hardly slept. I went out to the barn around midnight with the lantern again. The cows were still in rows, still facing north. I touched one's nose, cold with moisture, but she didn't blink. By morning, they'd gone back to normal, milling about, chewing hay, nudging one another as if nothing had happened. Not a single sign of the night before. Clara didn't want to talk about it, but I checked the television again after breakfast. It worked fine. Clear enough picture of the morning news. I never saw that strange broadcast again, and I never found out why the cows behaved the way they did. But I can still remember how precise those rows were, like they'd been arranged with a ruler, and how all those lights had moved across the screen, not random, but in ways that felt deliberate. It was the summer of 1957, and our town had just opened its first drive-in theater. They built it on an empty stretch of land at the edge of the county, just a gravel lot with a giant white screen set up against the tree line. People came from all over, farm families in their pickups, kids piling into the backs of Fords and Chevys, young couples looking for some privacy. I went with my friend Ray on the second weekend they had it running. He had an old Plymouth sedan, roomy enough that we could stretch our legs, and he insisted the sound was better through the little speaker boxes you hooked on your window than on any regular radio. That night was warm and still. No wind, no clouds, just the sort of heavy air that made your shirt stick to your back. The movie they were showing was Forbidden Planet, which felt like a big deal, something flashy and modern for a place like ours. The gravel lot was nearly full when we arrived. Kids were running between the cars with paper bags of popcorn, parents honking their horns to quiet them down. We parked halfway back, not too close to the screen, not so far that the figures looked tiny. While we waited for the sun to set, Ray got out and wandered over to the snack stand. I stayed put, watching the rows of cars pulling in, the beams of headlights sweeping across the dust. That was when I noticed him. It was a black Mercury coupe parked all by itself in the far corner, away from everyone else. The man inside was alone. He hadn't bothered to pull up near the other cars, just sat angled toward the screen as if the show didn't matter much to him anyway. What caught me was the way he was sitting perfectly upright, hands resting on the wheel even though the engine wasn't running. Everyone else was chatting, leaning out of their windows or fiddling with the speaker cables. He just stared straight ahead. Ray came back balancing 2 bottles of soda and a cardboard tray of popcorn. I didn't mention the man right away, but I kept glancing over in that direction. Even when the cartoon preview reel started, the guy didn't move. The movie began a little after 9. As the opening credits rolled across the screen, that's when something strange happened. At first, I thought it was part of the show, some special effect from the projector, but it wasn't. A line of lights, maybe 6 or 7, came gliding silently over the theater. They weren't like plane lights, no blinking, no sound, just a row of glowing orbs drifting in a perfect line. They passed directly overhead, slow and smooth, like they were following some path none of us could see. Nobody reacted. That's what unsettled me the most. Hundreds of people sitting in their cars, kids squealing over their sodas, teenagers laughing, and not a single head tilted up. It was as if they couldn't see it, except him. The man in the Mercury had tilted his face toward the sky the moment the lights appeared. His expression was hard to read from where I was, but there was no shock, no pointing or calling out like I wanted to. He looked like he had been waiting for them. I nudged Ray, whispered for him to look. He glanced around, confused, then shrugged and stuffed more popcorn in his mouth. "What are you talking about?" he said. The lights were still overhead, bright as lanterns, and he didn't see a thing. By the time they drifted past the tree line, disappearing soundlessly into the distance, my hands were damp from gripping the soda bottle too hard. I leaned out my window toward the Mercury. The man hadn't moved. He just lowered his gaze back to the screen and stayed there, still and calm, like nothing unusual had happened. The movie kept playing. Laughter, horns honking, the smell of buttered popcorn carried on the heavy air. Everything normal, except me and that man in the corner. I tried to focus on the film, but I couldn't shake it. Every time the light from the projector swept across the lot, I'd catch a glimpse of his profile, sharp, pale in the glow, never changing. Halfway through the picture, I noticed he still hadn't touched the speaker box. No sound was coming from his car. He wasn't watching the movie the way the rest of us were. His eyes would drift upward every so often, toward the empty sky above the screen, as though expecting something else. Near the end of the show, people started engines early, some ready to beat the traffic. Ray leaned over to ask if I wanted to grab a burger afterward. I said sure, though my stomach was in knots. When the credits rolled, horns honked, and cars pulled out in long lines toward the exit road. Dust hung low across the headlights. I glanced one last time toward the corner. The Mercury was gone. No engine noise, no headlights moving through the lot, just gone. I told myself he must have slipped out during the commotion at the end, but I hadn't seen him leave, and I'd been watching for it. On the drive back, Ray kept laughing about a scene from the movie, doing an impression of the robot. I nodded along, but barely heard him. The night air through the open window felt too cool on my face. When we passed the county road where the drive-in lights were still visible behind us, I caught myself scanning the sky, half expecting that line of orbs to reappear. I didn't say anything to Ray about the man in the Mercury. He wouldn't have believed me, not when he hadn't seen the lights either. But I remember the look on that man's face, steady, almost calm, as though the rest of us were only background noise, and the real show was happening above us. I went back to the drive-in a few more times that summer, saw westerns, comedies, even a horror picture. I never saw that Mercury again. Sometimes I'd park near the back row just to check the corners, but it was always empty, and I never saw those lights again either. But I can still picture that row of glowing orbs sliding soundlessly over the lot, and that single man watching them with the kind of quiet attention that made it feel less like a surprise and more like a meeting he'd been expecting all along. It was the end of March, still cold enough in Fife that your breath hung in the air after sunset. I was 17 then, living in Kirkcaldy, finishing my last year at the high school. It was a Friday night, and I was out near the coastal path with 3 mates from school, Ewan, Grant, and Lisa. We weren't doing anything special, just sitting on the low stone wall near the dunes, sharing a bag of chips from the chippy and watching the tide come in. It was about 9:30, maybe 10. The streetlights behind us didn't reach that far, so it was mostly dark except for the glow from the town a mile away. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it got. The waves were still there, but the usual wind off the water had died completely. We'd been laughing about something Grant said when Lisa pointed out toward the water and asked what that was. At first, I thought she meant a boat's light, but there was no boat. 3 lights were hovering just above the horizon, evenly spaced, glowing a dull orange like embers. They didn't flicker, and they didn't move. We stood up on the wall to get a better look. They were far enough out that you couldn't tell if they were over the water or in the sky, but definitely not on the shore. Ewan pulled out his phone, tried to film, but the screen showed nothing but black. He tried again with flash on, still nothing. I remember he swore under his breath and shoved the phone back in his pocket. We watched those lights for maybe a minute, trying to make sense of them. No sound, no movement. Then, as we were arguing about whether it could be flares or some kind of aircraft, the middle light dropped straight down into the water, or at least that's how it looked. The other 2 blinked out at the same time, leaving nothing but dark sea. We stayed there a while, waiting for something else to happen, but it didn't. After another few minutes, the wind came back in a rush, cold and salty. We decided to head home, agreeing not to say anything to our parents because it sounded too weird. Nothing happened over the weekend. Monday morning we were back at school, first period maths. It wasn't until third period English that something odd happened. Mrs. Cowie, our teacher, stepped out of the room for a second, then came back looking unsettled. She told us to keep reading quietly. Through the window, I saw 2 men walking down the corridor toward the staff room. Both were in black suits, crisp like they'd just come from a funeral or a court hearing. Black ties, white shirts. One was tall and thin, the other shorter but broad. At break, Lisa found me by the lockers. "Did you see those guys?" she asked. She'd seen them too. Ewan and Grant joined us, both saying they'd noticed the men in the corridor. It wasn't normal. No one came to our school dressed like that except maybe inspectors. But even then, they didn't look like that. Their faces were pale, hair neatly parted. They weren't carrying folders or clipboards. Later, during lunch, we overheard one of the younger teachers whispering to another in the staff room doorway. She said something like, They're asking if anyone's been talking about the sky. That's when I felt my stomach drop. We hadn't told anyone about the lights. None of us had. When we went back to class after lunch, the two men were in the hallway again, this time speaking quietly with the head teacher, Mr. Forbes. They weren't smiling, and he looked uneasy. They glanced at us as we passed, but didn't say anything. It wasn't a normal glance either. It felt deliberate, like they were checking off faces in their heads. By the time last period rolled around, the men were gone. We asked one of the office staff who they were, but she just said she didn't know, and her tone suggested she didn't want to talk about it. That night, the four of us met up again at Lisa's place. We were all shaken by how specific their question had been. Talking about the sky. Out of everything they could have asked, it was that. Ewan swore he hadn't told anyone about the lights, and none of us had posted about it online. We were certain. Over the next week, little things happened that felt off. A black car parked across from the school during lunch breaks, engine off, windows up. Always the same car. The driver never got out. Once, when Grant tried to get a closer look, it drove off slowly, not quickly like it was worried about being caught. At home, my phone started doing strange things. Once, during a call with Ewan, there was a faint clicking sound, and then dead silence for a few seconds before the call resumed. Another time, I found the screen recording app open even though I hadn't touched it. Lisa said her mom answered the house phone one night and heard nothing but breathing. We never saw the men again inside the school. But about 2 weeks later, walking home after dark, I thought I saw them across the street near the bus stop. Same suits, same stance, looking straight ahead. I blinked, and a car passed between us, and when it cleared, they were gone. I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. The coastal path where we'd seen the lights stayed empty after that. We went back once, early evening on a Sunday, but none of us could relax. Every sound felt amplified, the gulls, the wind, the traffic farther inland. We didn't see any lights, but we left after only 10 minutes. Even now, when I drive that way at night, I catch myself scanning the horizon for those orange glows. And at the school, whenever someone mentions inspectors or visitors, I picture the two men in black suits asking our teachers about the sky, and how they somehow knew to ask before anyone had said a word. I'd been into drone racing for a couple years by the time it happened. Not professionally or anything, just local meets and online streams mostly, but enough that I had a decent setup and a group of friends I raced with regularly. My name's Cole. I live outside Amarillo, Texas, where the wind farms spread out for miles like giant, slow-moving flowers. Perfect spot for drone racing because the thermals make the course tricky and the open space keeps us safe from people's houses or power lines. It was early May, dry but not blistering yet, and the wind had picked up in the late afternoon, just enough to give the drones a challenge without knocking them out of the sky. I was at our usual track, this cleared field near the biggest wind farm around. The turbines towered above us, spinning lazily as we set up. I'd been testing a new camera on my racer, the Sparrow MK2, hoping to get some cleaner footage for my stream. The goal was to catch smooth lines through the course and maybe snag some cool shots of the blades overhead. I launched the drone around 7 p.m., right before dusk settled in. The light was fading, but still enough to see the orange and red tips of the turbines against the sky. I pushed the throttle up and weaved through the gates we'd set, low passes, tight turns, and then a long stretch along the edge of the farm. About halfway through the run, I noticed something odd on the feed. Just past the last gate, a faint, twisting shape appeared near the tallest turbine. At first, I thought it was some trick of the light or a lens flare, but the shape spiraled upward slowly, like a smoke ring or a slow-moving vortex, twisting in place near the blades. It wasn't huge, maybe a few feet across, but it was definitely there. I tried to follow it with the drone, but right as I pushed forward, the signal started glitching. The image froze for a second, then the shape blinked out, vanished clean off the feed like it had never been there. The drone itself was fine, no loss of control or sudden drops. I landed it and checked the footage, rewinding to make sure I wasn't imagining things. The spiral was on the raw video, clear as day. I showed it to my buddy Marcus, who's into drone tech almost as much as me. We were both stumped. No one in the group had ever seen anything like that near the turbines before. Over the next few weeks, the spiral stayed in my head. I went back to the track a couple more times, but the weird shape never appeared again. Nothing else out of place, just the usual races, wind, and static-filled radio chatter. Then, about 3 weeks after that first sighting, I showed up for a late afternoon practice. The field was empty, except for a man standing near the pit area. He was wearing a black suit, odd enough for a dusty, open field with mostly casual dress, and his shoes were polished. The sun was low, making the lenses of his sunglasses gleam like mirrors. He introduced himself as Mr. Landry. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed, but there was something in his tone that made me listen closely. He complimented my drone skills, said he'd been watching some races online. When I asked where he was from or how he found me, he just smiled and said, "Let's just say I'm interested in the finer points of competition." We talked for maybe 10 minutes, mostly about drones, piloting, and the wind farm. I got the feeling he knew more about the spiral incident than he let on, but he never mentioned it directly. Before he left, he pulled a USB drive from his pocket and handed it to me. "This contains a copy of your last race recordings," he said. "Except the last hour." I blinked, confused. "The last hour?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Some courses shouldn't be won." He didn't stick around after that. Just walked to his car, a black sedan with tinted windows, and drove off without looking back. I plugged in the USB at home later. The files were exactly like my streams, except, sure enough, the last hour of footage was missing. The timestamp on the files showed continuous recording, but there was a chunk cut out. I checked my original files, and they all had that hour intact. So the copy was definitely altered. I tried reaching out to some of the local groups, asked if anyone else had noticed anything weird at the track, or if anyone had seen a suited guy hanging around. No one had. Marcus thought it might be some corporate or government thing trying to keep an eye on the wind farms, but no proof. After that, I stopped going out at dusk. I kept racing on weekends, but only in daylight and away from the turbines. The spiral never came back. The man in black never returned. It was subtle, almost like a warning. I don't know what courses shouldn't be won means exactly, but it felt like more than just a threat. Like I'd stumbled on something that was meant to stay hidden, and they made sure I got the message. That's the thing I can't shake. Not the shape, not the missing footage, but that line. Some courses shouldn't be won. I woke up to the key lying on my nightstand again, exactly where it always showed up now, next to my phone, just out of reach. It wasn't there when I went to bed, I was sure of it. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember if I had bought it or left it there myself, but I couldn't. The metal was cold and smooth, a standard brass key, nothing fancy, no markings except faint scratches that looked eerily like my own fingerprints. I'd never touched it before, at least not that I could remember. I lived alone in a small townhouse on the edge of Ashwood, a neighborhood that felt empty after dark. It had rained earlier, and the air smelled like wet asphalt. I reached for the key once, hesitated, then set it down. Something about it didn't feel right. My phone alarm buzzed, breaking the tension. This wasn't the first time it happened. It had started about a week ago. Every morning, I'd wake up and the key would be on the nightstand. Sometimes the scratches would be more pronounced, as if someone had pressed it in and out of their fingers deliberately. I tried to tell myself I was leaving it there subconsciously, that maybe I had a spare door key I didn't remember using. But I checked all my locks, my drawers, my closet. Nothing matched this key. It didn't fit any of my doors. The first night I noticed it, I had assumed it was a prank. Maybe my friend Liam thought it would be funny. I texted him the next day, dude, the key is back. What the hell? No response. I didn't press it. That was stupid, of course, because no one else could have entered my bedroom without leaving some sign, and my door was always locked. After a few nights, I started noticing other things. Tiny scratches on the hardwood floor like something had been dragged across it. Sometimes faint smells. Ozone, like electricity or a metallic tang. I chalked it up to stress. Work had been insane, my shifts at the lab stretching late, the rain tapping against the windows while I tried to fall asleep. But the key, the scratches, the smells, they kept repeating. One night, I decided to stay awake. I had set up a small lamp on the nightstand, hoping to catch whoever or whatever was leaving the key. I sat in bed, pretending to sleep, my eyes half closed. Around 2:14 a.m., I saw it, a shadow moving in the corner of the room, pale and featureless like a smear of light. I froze. My breath caught. The shadow didn't walk, it glided, and when it reached the nightstand, the key was there. It dropped it down gently, almost like placing it, and then the shadow was gone. The clock didn't move. No noise, no hum, nothing. I waited until sunrise before I dared to move. I checked the footage from my security camera aimed at the bedroom door, but the recording only showed static, then a single frame of the room, empty, time-stamped 3 minutes earlier than it should have been. I tried to call someone, anyone, but no one could explain it. My phone worked fine, and no one had been in the house. The next night, the key reappeared again. I examined the scratches more closely this time, using a magnifying glass. They weren't random. They followed the curves of my fingerprints exactly. That meant either I had done it without knowing, or something had copied me perfectly. The idea of someone or something watching me, knowing me that intimately, made my skin crawl. I started leaving notes, little post-its next to the key. Who are you? Stop leaving this here. I see you. I woke up each morning expecting an answer. Nothing. The key just sat there, the same scratches, no change. A few nights later, I was reading in bed when the lights dimmed. Not a flicker, but the whole room seemed to dim evenly. The air got colder and the metallic smell returned, stronger this time. The key lifted slightly off the nightstand, hovered for a second, and then slid toward the edge, stopping as if it had hit an invisible hand. I reached for it. My fingers brushed the metal, and a strange tingling shot up my arm. Not painful, just wrong. The room seemed to hum quietly, vibrating against my chest. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The key was back on the nightstand. I tried to leave the house, drive somewhere, escape, but it was like the key anchored me in place. No matter what I did, I returned to the townhouse. Sometimes I would wake in the kitchen with the key on the counter, as if I had carried it there in my sleep. Other times, it was in the bathroom, on the edge of the sink. My memory of these movements was blank. I kept a journal, writing down everything, the dates, times, weather, the smells, the scratches, the sensations. I began to notice patterns. The key never appeared during the day, always after midnight, always when the house was silent, and the scratches seemed to deepen after nights when I didn't wake up to see it. One night, I had a dream, or maybe a memory. I can't tell the difference. I was floating above my own body, the room below me dark except for the key glowing faintly on the nightstand. A figure stood in the corner, tall and thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Its face was blank. It reached toward the key, and my body obeyed, though I was only watching. When it picked up the key, I felt a pressure in my chest, a sense that I had no choice. I woke up sweating, the key on the nightstand, scratches more pronounced than ever. I tried ignoring it. I locked the key in a box, put it in a drawer, taped the drawer shut. I left for work the next morning, thinking maybe a little distance would help. When I returned that night, the drawer was open. The key sat on top of it, scratches faintly visible in the dim light. I began leaving cameras in the room every night, hoping to capture it. Motion sensors, infrared, audio, nothing. The footage would either be corrupted, silent, or show the room empty. Yet the key always appeared, always with those faint, impossible scratches. I talked to a locksmith once, casually, about the key. "Looks normal," he said. "Brass, standard cut, nothing unusual." I asked if a key could copy fingerprints. He looked at me like I was insane. No, not possible. And yet there they were. I don't know what it means. I don't know why the key is here, why it knows me, why it's always coming back. Sometimes I hear faint whispers at night, so low I can barely make them out, just the hiss of air over metal, maybe words, maybe nothing. "Don't fight them," I think I hear. Or maybe I'm imagining it. I've thought about leaving, moving across the country, but the key always comes back. It's like it knows where I am, where I sleep, how I move. And when I wake, it's always there, resting on the nightstand, waiting, scratches perfect, untouched by human hands. So now I live with it. I set up more cameras, more sensors, I write everything down. I check the key every night, study the scratches, wonder if I'm being watched, if I'm being measured. Every night I fall asleep with the key beside me, knowing it will be there when I wake, knowing that I will never understand how or why or who is leaving it. I'm Jonah Marks, and I work up at the Nenana Observatory. Not a big place, but it's our spot for scanning the skies and tracking whatever the weather and the auroras let us see. It's pretty remote, tucked in just past the edge of the Tanana Valley, and you get used to long stretches of silence and darkness, especially in the winter. Most folks up here are used to the quiet, but sometimes that quiet gets weird. It was late February, well into the long night season, when the sun barely peaks above the horizon. The cold had settled in for real, and the wind was rattling the observatory's windows like it was trying to tell me something. I was doing a late shift, alone, except for the blinking lights of the equipment and the endless hum of the heaters. I was monitoring the radio telescope, which usually picks up natural cosmic noise like pulsars or solar flares. Nothing fancy, mostly background static with occasional bursts. But that night, something caught my attention. A faint signal, just barely there at first, repeating on a loop. It didn't sound like anything I'd seen before. No pattern matching any known star or pulsar frequency. It was almost rhythmic, but not quite, like it was trying to imitate something but missing the beat. I double-checked the system logs and cross-checked it with nearby observatories via satellite link, but nobody else reported it. The weirdest part was the signal's apparent location. When I checked the antenna's pointing coordinates, the source was moving slowly along the horizon, hovering just above the tree line outside. It didn't match any known satellites or planes, none of the usual traffic tracked on radar or by the FAA's system. At first, I thought it was some glitch, equipment acting up or interference from the weather, but the weather was stable that night. Clear skies, no clouds or storms for miles. The signal kept coming back every few minutes, always the same faint pulse. I started jotting down times and coordinates, watching the source drift a little north, then dip back south, never rising higher than maybe 10 degrees above the horizon. Around 3 a.m., I noticed something else out the window. There was this glow, faint and pulsing, coming from the edge of the forest beyond the observatory. It wasn't like the aurora, which usually fills the whole sky in rolling curtains of green and pink. This was small, contained, a soft amber light that flickered behind the spruce. I grabbed my coat and headed out, boots crunching on the frozen ground. The air was sharper than inside, biting at my cheeks, but the sky was crystal clear. The light wasn't moving, just flickering steadily like a lantern or campfire. I walked closer, careful not to make noise. The snow was untouched, except for my prints, and no animals stirred. When I got within 50 yards, the light vanished, like someone snuffed out a candle. That's when I saw it. A series of impressions pressed into the snow. Tracks, but unlike any animal I'd seen. They were broad, maybe 8 inches across, and spaced evenly, almost like large, flat pads pressed into the ground. The pattern didn't curve or zigzag like a bear or wolf. It moved in a straight line toward the tree line, then just stopped. I stood there for a long minute, trying to hear something. Nothing. The silence was heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. I went back inside, shook off the cold, and sat back down at the controls. The signal was still there, pulsing quietly. Over the next few nights, the pattern repeated. The signal returned on the same schedule, drifting just above the horizon, and every time the light appeared near the tree line, always flickering for a few minutes, then gone. The tracks showed up after each sighting, always fresh, always the same broad shape, always stopping just inside the forest. I started keeping a log, noting the signal's timings and the light's appearances. Sometimes the signal drifted a bit faster, sometimes it paused, but it never disappeared completely. The movements were too irregular for any man-made object I knew, too purposeful to be random natural interference. The locals heard about the flickering light by the third night. They shrugged it off as a hunter's fire or an electrical glitch. There's always stories like this around here, but I could tell a few of the older folks were uneasy. One night, around 5 a.m., I was watching the signal when something different happened. The source stopped moving and held steady right on the horizon. The pulse grew stronger, brighter somehow. I looked outside again, and the light was back. this time larger and steady, glowing with a pale blue tint. I felt a kind of pressure in the air, like when a storm's about to break but without any wind or clouds. My skin prickled and the hairs on my arms stood up. I wasn't afraid exactly, just aware, like I'd walked into a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Then the light blinked out. I checked outside, no tracks this time. The snow was pristine, no sign that anything had been near. I spent the next morning combing through the forest edge where the tracks usually appeared, but there was nothing. No disturbed branches, no broken twigs, no footprints besides my own from the night before. The signal persisted for a few more nights, but after that blue light, it started to weaken. Eventually, it disappeared altogether. I still check the sky and the radio feed when I'm up there. Sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I hear a faint tapping on the observatory's roof or see shadows flitting past the windows, but there's never anything there when I look. I don't know what I was tracking or what the light was out there. Could have been some rare atmospheric phenomenon or maybe a bird with bioluminescence I've never heard of. But it all felt different, like something just outside our understanding, quietly watching, leaving hints, but never revealing more. So that's it. Just some nights up in the cold, staring at a signal that shouldn't be there, and a light that doesn't belong. I guess some things in the sky don't want to be found. I was up early that morning, prepping the weather balloon launch out by the outskirts of Amarillo, Texas. It was late April, just before dawn, and the air was cool but already holding the promise of heat for later. I work as a meteorologist for a small private research outfit, mostly routine stuff, sending balloons up to gather upper atmosphere data for storm forecasting. Nothing glamorous, just charts and numbers, but I liked the work. I liked being out where the sky was wide and empty. That day, the launch went pretty much like any other. We set up the balloon and the payload, sensors, radios, a tiny camera pointing down at the Earth. The whole thing was automated except for the launch and the tracking. I was standing next to the basket, watching it rise, the balloon getting smaller and smaller, drifting east with the morning wind. I had the radio scanner on, listening to air traffic chatter from nearby commercial flights. The balloon usually went up for an hour or two before bursting and falling back with a small parachute. After it was airborne and climbing steadily, I decided to pull out my binoculars and watch the horizon. The sunrise was coming fast now, painting everything pale gold. I noticed a tiny bright dot way up high, almost too small to be anything, but it wasn't moving like a plane or a bird. It just stayed there, still like it was watching. I figured it was probably a weather satellite or maybe a drone from a research group, but something about it didn't sit right. The light was a sharp silver, not blinking or flashing, no navigation lights, just a smooth, constant shine reflecting the sun. I adjusted the binoculars to get a better look. The object looked small, maybe a few feet wide, but too far away to be sure. It was hovering, almost perfectly motionless. No sound, no contrails, no blinking lights, no wings or rotors. Just this smooth, metallic glint suspended against the pale blue sky. I tapped the radio and called over to the air traffic controller frequency. Hey, this is Amarillo Weather Balloon Launch. We're seeing a small object about 20,000 feet up, slightly north of our location. Do you have any traffic or reports on that? Static filled the channel. Then a calm male voice came through. No known traffic in your area at that altitude. Nothing on radar matching your description. Are you sure? I told him what I was seeing and gave rough coordinates, but the response was basically, nothing on radar, no other flights nearby. I scanned around the spot again. The balloon was climbing higher now, almost 23,000 feet, heading into commercial airspace, but the object was still there, just beyond the balloon's altitude, maybe another 5,000 feet higher. I was tracking the balloon's telemetry on my laptop, watching the data scroll by. Then I noticed something odd. The balloon's GPS altitude was fluctuating a little more than usual. Nothing extreme, but it was dipping and rising in a way that seemed off for a stable ascent. I checked the camera feed from the balloon. Although it was pointing downward, it caught a little slice of sky above the horizon. At first, the metallic object wasn't in frame, but as the balloon drifted, it slowly edged into view. It was faint, but definitely there. A tiny shape, perfectly round, smooth, and gleaming. After a few minutes, the balloon's data showed an unexpected slowdown. The ascent rate dropped sharply, then leveled off. I looked outside, scanning the sky in that direction, but the object hadn't moved. A sudden wind gust rattled the equipment on the ground. The temperature was starting to climb, and the early morning calm shifted to a steady breeze. I pulled my jacket tighter as the sun came up fully. I was pretty sure I should have contacted someone else, FAA, military, or air traffic again, but I hesitated. The object wasn't doing anything threatening. It just hung there, like a silent watcher. I kept an eye on the screen and binoculars for another 20 minutes. The balloon started to descend slowly, as expected. The object remained still, its metallic surface catching the sun's rays in a way that made it look almost liquid. At one point, a small commercial jet crossed the horizon, heading west, well below the object. The plane's pilot didn't report anything unusual on the frequency I listened to. The balloon's descent was smooth until the altitude dropped below 15,000 feet. That's when the object suddenly vanished. 1 second it was there, the next, gone. No flash, no noise, no trail, just disappeared. I kept looking for it, scanning the sky for a good 5 minutes afterward. Nothing. The balloon's parachute deployed as planned, and it drifted gently down to the ground about 50 miles east of Amarillo. I drove out to retrieve it later that afternoon. Back in the office, I reviewed the flight data again, hoping to find something I'd missed. The altitude fluctuations during the ascent made me uneasy, like something had affected the balloon's buoyancy or pushed against it. But the sensors showed no signs of interference, no electromagnetic spikes, nothing unusual besides the weird changes in altitude. I sent the footage from the balloon's camera to my supervisor, cropped to just the sky portion where the object appeared, but the file looked grainy and distorted in that area. It almost looked like the camera sensor struggled to focus on the object, like light was bending oddly around it. That footage was gone by the next day. My supervisor told me it had been lost during transfer, an error in the server or the hard drive crash. I asked to see backups, but there were none. I checked in with the FAA the following week, asking if there were any unusual reports or radar logs around the time of the launch. They said everything was normal. No unknown objects detected, no flights near the balloon other than the scheduled commercial traffic. I haven't heard about anything like it since. No one else saw it. No one reported anything. The weather balloon program continued as usual, but I kept thinking about that smooth, hovering silver dot up there, watching the sky without a sound. Sometimes when I'm out looking at the clouds, I wonder if it's still up there somewhere, just waiting. Completely still, out of sight. I was working a freelance gig in the Pacific Northwest, mostly just chasing weather stories and the odd local event for an online magazine. It was mid-October, and the days were getting shorter, colder, the sky often overcast with thick, low clouds. One of those days, I decided to drive out to the coast near Astoria, Oregon. I figured the fog rolling in from the ocean might give me some good shots, maybe something moody for my portfolio. That evening, I parked my car at a small pullout near the shore. The wind was brisk, the kind that sneaks through your jacket and chills your skin. I had my camera out, pointing at the thick cloud cover hanging low over the water. It was nearly dark, just after sunset, but the horizon still held that dull orange glow. I was fiddling with my lens, trying to capture the shifting fog and the way the water rippled beneath it, when I noticed a cluster of lights moving just below the clouds. At first, I thought it was a group of fishing boats, but the lights were too uniform, too steady. They moved together like a single shape, slow and deliberate, shifting through the fog in perfect formation. I zoomed in and snapped a few pictures. That's when I saw it, a perfect triangle made up of 3 amber lights, each about the size of a street lamp, arranged with unnerving precision. They didn't blink or change intensity, and the shape didn't waver. It just slid silently beneath the cloud cover. I kept shooting, trying to track it, but the fog thickened and the lights disappeared behind the mist after maybe 5 minutes. I stayed there for a while longer, hoping it would come back, but it didn't. Back in my hotel room that night, I uploaded the photos and zoomed in on the cluster. The triangle was crystal clear in the shots. almost surreal against the cloudy backdrop. I sent a few to friends who were into this kind of weird stuff, expecting at least some skepticism or jokes. A few days later, I was walking down a busy sidewalk in downtown Portland, heading toward a coffee shop. It was mid-afternoon, cloudy but dry. As I passed a corner near a bookstore, I noticed a man in a black suit standing just outside, holding a large rolled-up print. He was middle-aged, clean-cut, hair slicked back, the kind of guy who looked like he stepped out of a corporate ad from the 50s. He caught my eye and nodded. Without a word, he unfurled the print right there on the pavement. It was my photo, the triangular lights from the coast blown up to almost 2 feet wide. I stopped, confused, and said, "That's mine. How did you get this?" He didn't smile. He just looked at the print, then back at me. "You saw the wrong part of the sky," he said calmly. I blinked, trying to figure out what he meant. "What do you mean?" Before I could ask anything else, he rolled the print back up and started walking away, disappearing into the crowd like he was never there. I stood there for a minute, staring after him, feeling like I'd just been part of some strange setup. I checked my phone to call a friend, but noticed the battery was nearly dead, even though I'd charged it fully that morning. The signal was weak too, like I was stuck in a dead zone despite being in the city. That night, I went back through my photos, trying to find anything else I missed. There was nothing but the triangle in the sky. No planes, no drones, no flares, just those 3 steady lights. Over the next few days, I kept seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Shadows moving just beyond street lamps, quiet footsteps behind me when I was alone, cars parked a little too long nearby with tinted windows. Once, at a gas station, a man in a black suit filled up the pump next to me. He didn't say a word, just stared straight ahead. When I glanced over, he was gone, but the pump was still running. I didn't mention any of this to friends. It felt stupid, like I was imagining it or maybe losing it. One evening, I was at a diner near my apartment, eating alone. The place was mostly empty. The lights flickered a little, the heater rattled. Outside, a cold drizzle was falling, the kind that soaks through clothes and chills your bones. I looked out the window and saw a figure standing across the street under a street lamp. Another man in black, I think. He didn't move for what felt like minutes. Then he just turned and walked away into the mist. I left the diner quickly after that. Walking home, I kept looking over my shoulder, the quiet sounds of the city seeming louder than usual. The streets were almost empty. At home, I checked my phone again. The triangle photo was gone from my gallery, replaced by a single image of an empty gray sky. I swear I didn't delete it. I tried to tell myself I must have, but it felt wrong. The next day, I saw a news report about unexplained lights reported off the coast near Astoria, around the same time I was there. Nothing official, just some locals calling it strange atmospheric phenomena. I haven't gone back to that stretch of coast since. The photo is lost, the lights vanished, but sometimes when I'm outside, especially on foggy evenings, I catch a glimpse of 3 faint points of light moving just beyond the clouds, silent and perfectly aligned. And I still wonder who that man was, standing on the sidewalk with my photo, telling me I was looking in the wrong place. I never thought I'd talk about this, but here goes. I'm a retired Air Force mechanic, spent most of my career working on planes and helicopters at various bases. After 30 years, I've seen a lot of weird stuff, but what I'm about to tell you still feels off, even now that I'm out of the service. It happened one night, years ago, when I was stationed at a pretty remote base in Nevada, Tonopah Test Range. It was late, around 2 a.m., and I was doing my usual rounds. Part of the job was checking on aircraft parked out on the ramp, making sure nothing was out of place. That night, the moon was low, almost full, and the desert air was surprisingly cool for July. I was halfway through my checks when a commotion near the west hangar caught my attention. I'd heard rumors before about special projects here, stuff nobody talked about, but I never really believed it until that night. A convoy of black SUVs rolled up, moving fast but quiet, with flashing blue lights that didn't seem to reflect anywhere except on their own vehicles. They stopped near one of the large hangars, the one at the far edge of the base, away from most of the active flight lines. Curious, I decided to follow at a safe distance, using the shadows of the buildings to stay out of sight. I wasn't supposed to be wandering around at that hour, but something about the scene pulled me in. The back of the hangar doors was open just enough for me to peek inside. What I saw made me freeze. There was this thing on a flatbed truck, covered with a black tarp. But not like a normal tarp. It looked almost oily, like it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. A couple of soldiers in full tactical gear stood guard nearby, their faces tense, radios pressed tight to their mouths. The area was unusually quiet. No sounds of engines, no voices, just that heavy silence. I waited a few minutes, then one of the soldiers lifted the tarp just a bit, enough for me to catch a glimpse. The shape underneath was smooth, completely seamless. No bolts, no panels, no rivets or seams anywhere. It was curved, like a flattened oval, and the surface looked almost wet. But it wasn't shiny, more like a matte black, except darker than anything I'd ever seen. It didn't look like any aircraft I knew. Nothing from the Air Force, Navy, or any contractors I'd worked with. It was almost like it was absorbing the light around it, but there was no shadow underneath either. Then the tarp dropped back down. The soldiers loaded up and closed the hangar doors fast. I stayed put, waiting for the convoy to move again. They didn't leave right away, just sat there for maybe 15 minutes. I'm guessing they were waiting on clearance or something. When they finally rolled out, I followed them at a distance. The convoy headed off base toward a restricted section of the desert. The strange part was, nobody ever mentioned this. The next morning, I asked around, but everyone either acted like I was imagining things or gave me a no-comment kind of look. I kept quiet too. I wasn't about to get in trouble, and honestly, I didn't want to deal with any rumors. But that night stuck with me. The way the craft looked, like it was alive, almost, and the way the guards treated it like it was something dangerous, not just classified. Weeks later, I checked the logs and base reports for any flights or tests that might explain it. Nothing. No records of new aircraft, no unusual activity. It was like whatever it was never existed. I tried to forget about it, but the feeling of watching that thing so smooth and silent kept coming back. Years passed. I retired, moved to a small town in Colorado, and tried to put my Air Force days behind me. But sometimes when I'm out on the porch at night, I think about that convoy, about the way that object moved through the shadows, and I wonder if anyone else ever saw it. It's like a ghost you know is real, but can't prove. Something out there, hidden, moving in the dark. And the silence around it is louder than any engine roar I ever worked on. I was out in my backyard late one night, just like I usually am when the sky's clear. I live in Flagstaff, Arizona, so the light pollution's pretty low, and it's great for stargazing. I'm not a pro or anything, just an amateur astronomer. My setup's simple: a decent telescope, some star charts, and a DSLR to snap photos when I feel like it. I usually just sit out there for hours, tracking constellations or hunting for planets. That night, it was early spring, around 11:30 p.m. The air was dry and crisp, a little chilly but comfortable with a jacket. The moon was just a thin crescent, so the sky was pretty dark. I had been looking at the Hercules cluster for a while, just zooming in and out, taking long exposure shots to try and get a better view of some faint stars. Nothing unusual until I noticed something odd. I'd set the telescope up facing a patch of sky where there's usually a neat little grouping of stars. A cluster I'm familiar with. I remember thinking how clear the stars looked, sharp and steady. Then, through the eyepiece, I saw the whole cluster suddenly vanish. I mean, literally gone. The stars disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. It wasn't just dimming or flickering. The entire circle of stars was just not there. I blinked and moved the scope slightly, thinking maybe I'd lost focus or the clouds were rolling in, but the rest of the sky was fine. The stars around that spot were still there, twinkling as usual. It was just that perfect circle, maybe 10 or 12 stars, that vanished. It stayed like that for exactly 3 seconds, which I timed with my watch because it was so weird I figured I'd better keep track. Then, just as suddenly as they disappeared, the stars reappeared in the exact same positions. I stared at the eyepiece, trying to process what I'd just seen. My heart started beating a little faster. I looked around, checking for any clouds or anything that might have caused the effect. Nothing. The air was clear. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. so I waited a bit and refocused the telescope on the same spot. I didn't want to take another photo right away because the last one came out blurry. Instead, I just watched. After about 10 minutes, the stars in that exact spot flickered again. This time, it wasn't a total disappearance. It was like they dimmed drastically, then slowly brightened back up over a span of maybe 5 seconds. It was subtle, but definitely not normal. At that point, I started feeling uneasy, like I was being watched. My backyard isn't big, but it's surrounded by tall pines, so it's pretty isolated. I glanced behind me, half expecting a neighbor or a late-night dog walker. Nothing. I pulled out my phone to check the photos I'd taken. The images showed the star cluster perfectly visible in the first few shots. Then in the frame, from the exact moment the stars vanished, that circle was just a black hole against the rest of the sky. No stars, no light, just empty space. I couldn't explain it. I showed the photos to a couple of friends who were more into astronomy, but no one had a decent answer. They suggested everything from camera glitches to weird atmospheric interference, but none of it really fit. A perfect, sudden disappearance of a specific star cluster for 3 seconds? That's not normal. The next morning, I checked some online sky trackers and astronomical reports. No meteor showers, no solar flares, nothing unusual noted that would cause a cluster of stars to just blink out like that. That night, I went back out to watch again, hoping it was a one-off thing. But as I looked through the telescope, the same spot in the sky started to shimmer faintly, like heat haze on pavement, but in the cold night air. The stars twinkled erratically, almost like they were flickering in and out of existence. I felt like the sky itself was unstable there. I packed up early after that. The feeling I got watching that patch made me want to get inside. I kept the photos on my phone for a while, but after a couple of days, I deleted them. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about those images was off. Like, looking at them too long might pull me into the same weirdness I saw through the scope. Since then, I've been cautious about looking in that part of the sky. I don't get out there as much anymore, and when I do, I stick to familiar constellations far from that spot. I still don't know what I saw. It was real. I know that much. The stars literally disappeared and came back, and nothing I've read or heard explains how that could happen. I guess I'll keep looking up, but maybe not quite as close this time. We were driving through Nevada late one summer evening, just me, my wife Emily, and our daughter Sophie. We'd been on the road for hours, heading home to Tucson after visiting some family near Reno. The heat had started to fade as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the desert around us was turning from dusty red to deep purple. I was behind the wheel of our old Subaru Outback. Nothing fancy, but it's been reliable for years. Emily was in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, and Sophie was in the back seat, half asleep with her headphones on. The radio was off, and the only sound was the hum of the engine and the tires on the pavement. We were somewhere just past Tonopah, driving on a stretch of highway that felt endless. The landscape was mostly flat, dotted with scrub and the occasional lonely cactus. The sky was mostly clear, a few stars starting to peek out, but a thin haze hung near the horizon. Out of nowhere, I saw this bright light flash across the edge of my windshield. It wasn't like a shooting star or a plane at first. It moved fast and erratically, darting low along the horizon. I blinked, thinking maybe it was a reflection or a trick of the eye. "Did you see that?" I asked Emily, who looked up from her phone and shrugged. "Maybe a drone or something," she said, though she didn't sound convinced. The light zipped across again, this time clearer. It was a steady, glowing orb, white, but not harsh like a car headlight or a flashlight. What caught me was how it moved. It darted straight across the horizon, then right in front of us, made a sharp 90-degree turn, and didn't slow down at all. It just zipped straight up and vanished behind the hills. I said, "That's got to be a jet or something, right? But I've never seen one turn that fast." Emily nodded, "Maybe some military thing. We're close to a couple of bases around here." Sophie finally took off her headphones and asked quietly, "Did you guys see that light?" It was really weird. I kept watching the horizon, half expecting the light to come back, but it didn't. The sky was darker now, and the stars were clearer. We kept driving, and I glanced down at the dashboard clock. It was showing 9:17 p.m., but then suddenly flickered and reset itself to 12 a.m. The numbers blinked a few times, then went completely dark. I frowned and tried the clock buttons, but it wouldn't come back on. Emily looked over and said, "That's weird." I shrugged it off, thinking maybe a glitch or a wiring problem. It was an old car, after all. I flipped on the dome light for a second, checked my phone for the time. It said 9:18 p.m., so the clock was definitely off. The weirdness stuck with me, though. We were alone on that highway, miles from any town or gas station. I felt a little unsettled, but didn't want to make a big deal out of it. The desert can play tricks on you at night. A few miles later, Sophie pointed out the window. "Look, over there." I looked where she was pointing and saw something else. At first, it looked like a cluster of small lights, but then they started moving together, hovering just above the desert floor. They shifted shape slowly, almost like they were floating in formation, then broke apart and disappeared behind a ridge. Emily said quietly, "That can't be drones or anything normal, right?" I wasn't sure. The desert's been used for all kinds of tests and experiments, and I knew there were areas restricted by the military. But it didn't feel right. We drove on. The highway stretched empty and quiet, and the strange lights didn't come back. That's when the dashboard clock flickered again. This time, it reset itself back to 9 p.m., like it had gone backward. I tapped it again, and the numbers vanished completely. Emily said maybe it's the heat or the wiring. We should just keep moving. I agreed, but something felt off. I started noticing little things. The road signs seemed older than I remembered. The desert looked different somehow, like the same stretch of highway, but a little out of place. The air smelled faintly like ozone or something electrical. Whiskey, our German shepherd back home, was on my mind. I kept picturing how he'd react if he were there with me. I felt a chill, even though the air was warm. About 10 minutes later, Emily said, "Did you just hear that?" I strained to listen. There was a low humming sound, not from the car, not from the highway, but something else, faint and pulsing, like a distant machine. I rolled down the window a bit. The sound grew just a little louder, but still soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat or a fan running somewhere far off. Then everything went quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you notice every little noise. The tires on the road, my breathing, the wind brushing against the car. I looked up at the sky again. The stars were still there, but no lights, no movement. The highway stretched ahead, dark and empty. The clock stayed blank. We didn't talk much after that. Sophie leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. Emily kept glancing around like she was waiting for something to happen. We made it to the next town, Beatty, and stopped for gas. The station was old, the lights flickering a bit, but everything looked normal. I checked my phone again. The time was correct and the battery was fine. Back on the road, the car's clock finally came back on. It was a little slow, maybe a minute behind my phone, but it worked. We got home around midnight and Whiskey was waiting by the door, wagging his tail. That night, I tried to make sense of what we saw. The light darting across the horizon, the sharp turn, the clock resetting twice, the humming noise. I searched online for military exercises or drone tests near Tonopah and Beatty, but nothing matched the timing or description. The whole trip felt like a glitch in time, or maybe something else watching us from the desert. I still drive that stretch sometimes, but I haven't seen anything like it again. The clock in the car? I replaced it, but it never quite felt right. I live in a small town called Miller's Creek, out in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. Population's barely over 700, and most of the folks here know each other by name or at least wave from their porches. It's one of those places where nothing much happens, the kind of quiet that feels safe but also kind of empty. There's this old radio tower on the edge of town, maybe 100 feet tall, rusty and leaning a little to the side like it's giving up. Nobody uses it anymore, or at least not officially. I think it was shut down sometime in the 90s. It's just been standing there, a relic, surrounded by trees and weeds. One night, around 10:30 p.m., I was driving home from my shift at the diner. The night was clear and cold, early November, with that sharp chill that sneaks through your jacket no matter how thick it is. The roads were empty except for a few stray headlights in the distance. As I passed near the radio tower, I noticed something odd in the sky. There was this glowing shape hovering just above the tower. At first, I thought it might be a drone or some kind of maintenance light, but it didn't look right. The shape was soft and blurred around the edges, like it was made of mist or light rather than solid matter. It wasn't the steady red or white light you'd expect from a beacon. It was pale blue and almost pulsing, like it was breathing. I slowed the car down and rolled the window down, hoping to get a better look. The glow was faint, but definitely there. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture. The screen went black as soon as I hit the shutter button, like the camera turned off or refused to work. I tried again, tapping the camera app and even restarting the phone. Nothing. The phone stayed dead for a solid 10 minutes before coming back on like nothing happened. I kept driving home, feeling strange and unsettled. When I told my neighbor Karen the next morning, she said she'd seen the same thing a few nights earlier. She'd even tried taking pictures and got the same result. Pitch black photos with no sign of the glow. That afternoon, the story started spreading. A handful of people in town said they'd seen the glowing shape too, all around the same time of night. Some described it as a hovering orb. Others said it looked more like a thin, oval light, but everyone agreed it was right above or near the radio tower. What freaked me out most was that every photo anyone took came out completely black, even photos taken during the day. People tried everything. Different phones, digital cameras, even a disposable film camera someone dug out of their drawer. The film photos developed just like normal pictures, but the parts showing the tower and the sky where the glow appeared were always totally blank. At first, I figured it was some kind of prank or weird reflection, but no one could explain how the photos were failing like that, especially in broad daylight when the glow wasn't even there. The town started to feel tense, like everyone was watching the tower but afraid to talk about it too much. A few days later, I decided to walk down there myself. It was late afternoon, cloudy and cold, with a thin drizzle that made the dirt trail muddy. I brought my dog, Lyra, a brindle-colored shepherd mix, who's usually calm but tends to get nervous around unfamiliar places. As I approached the tower, I noticed something strange on the ground around it. The grass and dirt were flattened in a roughly circular pattern, like something heavy had been pressing down for a long time. There were no footprints or tire tracks in the mud nearby, just this perfect even patch of crushed earth. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the flattened ground. I thought maybe it could explain some of the weirdness. Maybe something had landed or been placed there recently. When I looked at the photo though, that spot was completely black, like my phone had glitched again. Lyra whined softly and pulled at her leash. She stared up at the tower, ears back, growling low. I didn't blame her. I felt a cold shiver run through me. I called her closer and kept walking around the base of the tower. No one was there, no sounds except the rain and the soft creak of the old metal frame swaying slightly in the wind. On the walk back, the clouds started to break, and some sunlight came through in slanting rays. I took another photo, this time of the sky and the tower from a distance. When I checked it, the tower looked like a black void in the middle of the bright sky, like the camera had erased it entirely. I showed the photos to Karen and a few other neighbors. They all had the same thing. Dark patches or completely black areas where the tower should be. It wasn't just bad lighting or shadows, it was like the camera sensor was rejecting that part of the image altogether. Later that evening, I decided to try recording video. I set my phone up on a tripod facing the tower and hit record, leaving it running for about 20 minutes after sunset. When I checked the footage, everything looked normal at first. Trees, sky, the faint outline of the tower. But about 10 minutes in, the tower disappeared completely. The video showed only an empty patch of sky where it had been. I rewound and watched it again and again, but every time the tower vanished in the middle of the clip. I felt myself getting more and more unsettled. It wasn't just a trick of the light or some weird camera glitch. It was something actively interfering with the way the tower appeared, at least in images. The next night, I stayed up late, watching the tower from my porch with binoculars. Around 10:15 p.m., the glowing shape showed up again, drifting slowly above the tower like a lantern caught in a still breeze. It didn't make a sound, No humming, no buzzing, just this quiet, steady pulse of light. I grabbed my phone to film it, but the screen went black immediately, like before. I tried switching apps, restarting the phone, even lowering the brightness, but nothing worked. After a few minutes, the glow faded away and disappeared behind the trees. The weirdest part was how calm the town felt after all this. No one panicked or called the authorities. No news crews showed up. It was like everyone was silently agreeing not to push too hard, to just keep their distance. A week later, the glow hasn't appeared again, and the photos are starting to look normal. The tower is just the tower now, rusty and leaning, nothing black or glowing. But sometimes, late at night, I catch myself staring toward it, wondering what that shape was and why it made my phone shut down every time I tried to capture it. Lyra still doesn't like going near the tower. If I try to walk her down that way, she pulls hard and whines, looking back over her shoulder like she's seen something she doesn't want to see. I don't know what that glowing shape was or why it messed with every photo, but whatever it wasn't just light or a drone. It felt wrong, like something that didn't belong, quietly watching from above a forgotten tower in a town that time forgot. I've always liked night fishing. It's quiet, mostly just me, my rod, and the lake under the stars. My name's Tom Granger, and I live out near Lake Woodson, a small, pretty ordinary place in northern Wisconsin. Nothing fancy about it, just a bunch of trees, some cabins, and a lake that's usually calm and dark at night. My dog, Whiskey, a scruffy mutt with a lazy streak, usually comes with me. He's not much of a swimmer, but loves sitting on the dock and watching the water. One Friday night in early September, the air was cool, but still felt heavy, like the kind of night right before a storm rolls in. Whiskey and I headed down to the lake around 9:30 p.m., planning to fish for a few hours before calling it. The sky was clear at first, full of stars, but the wind had picked up a little, just enough to rustle the leaves and make the water's surface shimmer softly. We set up on the far end of the dock, the one that sticks out a little over the deepest part of the lake. The water there's usually still, even when it's windy, because the trees on the far shore block the worst of the gusts. I cast my line and settled in with a thermos of coffee. Whiskey curled up at my feet, eyes half closed. The night was peaceful, nothing but the occasional splash from a fish or the distant call of an owl. Then, about an hour in, I noticed something weird. At first, it was just a faint glow near the water's surface, about 30 feet from the dock. It looked like a light, but it was too dim and kind of diffuse, like someone had dropped a glow stick under the water and it was just barely visible through the dark. I leaned forward to get a better look. The glow was pale greenish white and didn't flicker or change shape. What caught me off guard was that the water around it wasn't disturbed at all. Usually, if something's floating or moving near the surface, there's some ripple or splash. This was perfectly still, like the light was just hovering there, no contact with the water at all. I figured maybe it was some kind of fish with bioluminescence or a reflection of something on the shore. I stood up and shone my flashlight toward it. The beam sliced through the dark, but the glow stayed the same. No reaction, no movement. Whiskey perked up, ears twitching, staring at the same spot. Then the light started to rise. Slowly at first, just inches above the water, then faster, moving upward like a bubble escaping from the lake bed. Except it wasn't a bubble, it was smooth, round, and glowed brighter as it rose. The water beneath it remained perfectly flat, no ripples, no waves, nothing. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, half expecting it to vanish or be some trick of the light. But it kept going, rising maybe 10 feet above the surface, then drifted horizontally, moving away from the dock and across the sky. I dropped my rod and grabbed my phone, fumbling to get the camera app open, but as soon as I focused on the glowing orb, the screen dimmed and then went black. I tried again, but it stayed that way, dead, as if the phone was refusing to record or even see the light. Whiskey growled low, his hackles up, and I felt a chill despite the mild air. The glow kept drifting silently, smooth and steady, with no sound or disturbance at all. It moved in a slow arc, like it was following some invisible path across the stars. I followed it with my eyes, heart beating a little faster until it just disappeared. Not with a flash or a burst, just faded gently like turning off a lamp. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 or 3 minutes, but after it vanished, the lake was still dead calm. No ripples, no waves, nothing to suggest anything had moved through the water or sky. I sat back down on the dock trying to process what I'd just seen. Whiskey stayed close, still tense, ears swiveling toward the trees in the lake. I kept glancing at my phone, hoping the camera would come back on, but it stayed black. The thermos was cold now, my hands shaking a little. For the rest of the night, I kept watching the sky, but nothing else showed up. No lights, no sounds, no weird reflections, just the normal quiet, the crickets, the wind in the trees, the occasional splash far off. The next morning, I told my neighbor Greg about it. He's a fisherman too, knows the lake like the back of his hand. Greg said he hadn't seen anything strange, but he didn't dismiss me. Just said, sometimes the lake has its mysteries, and that part of the world tends to mess with your head after dark. Over the next few days, I checked with a couple of other locals. A woman named Elsie mentioned seeing a faint light near the lake around the same time, but she thought it was just a flashlight or maybe some kids messing around. No one else saw anything like I did. I tried to find some explanation. Bioluminescent algae? Doesn't happen in freshwater lakes around here. Reflection from a boat? No boats were out that night. Fishing lights? None on the lake at all. No airplanes or helicopters in the area either. What stuck with me was the water, how it never moved, even though something was clearly coming up from it and floating away. The glow was there, bright and steady, but the lake didn't react like it should. Since then, I've gone back to the lake a few times, sometimes with whiskey, sometimes alone. The night I saw the light, the air was different somehow. Thicker, heavier. I can't explain it. Other nights, it's just normal, calm, quiet. My phone still works fine now. No blackouts or dead screens. And whiskey? He's never liked going out on the dock after dark since that night. He stays close to shore and doesn't want to look out over the water. I don't know what that light was. I'm not sure I want to. It didn't hurt anyone, didn't say or do anything. Just showed up, drifted across the sky, and disappeared without a trace. But sometimes when the wind's right and the lake is perfectly still, I swear I catch a faint glow out there. Just under the surface, waiting. I was out in the woods behind my place around 10 p.m., flying my drone. The area is pretty remote, just a bunch of pines and some rocky outcrops. Nothing fancy. I usually take the drone up at night because the quiet makes it easier to focus. Plus, the lights from the nearby town are far enough away that the sky is really dark, so the drone's LEDs stand out against the black. That night, I had my dog, a German Shepherd named Rory, sitting with me on the tailgate of my truck. He was calm, just watching the woods, ears twitching every now and then. The air was cold, early November kind of cold, with a slight wind moving through the branches. I had the drone up maybe 15 or 20 minutes, just cruising above the treetops, practicing smooth, slow shots of the forest canopy. The controller was steady in my hands. The screen showed the live feed from the drone's camera. Around the 5-minute mark, something weird happened. The drone suddenly wobbled like it lost control for a second or two. I remember it dipping sharply, and I slammed the joystick to correct it. It stabilized pretty quickly, but it definitely freaked me out. I checked the controller for warnings or errors. Nothing unusual popped up. The battery was fine, GPS signal strong. I brought the drone down slowly and landed it safely on a flat rock near the edge of a small clearing. Rory perked up but didn't bark or anything. I was about to pack up and call it a night when I decided to check the footage before turning off the controller. I'd seen weird glitches with drone cams before, so I wasn't expecting much. But when I watched the clip from right before the wobble, something caught my eye. There's a spot just above the treetops where the drone's camera caught something. I say something because it's not like a bird or an animal. It's a shape, kind of oval, a little wider than tall, and it's completely still in the frame. No movement at all. The edges are soft, like it's slightly blurred, but the shape itself has this faint, dull glow to it, like a pale light behind a thin veil. What really got me was the silence on the audio. The drone picks up wind and the faint rustle of the trees, but right where this shape is, the ambient sounds just drop out. It's like a pocket of silence in the forest. I rewound the clip several times, zoomed in, adjusted the brightness and contrast. The shape never moves. The drone flies around it, but it stays there. No blinking lights, no flashes, no wings or limbs. I grabbed my jacket and flashlight and headed out to the spot the drone was hovering over, hoping to find some explanation. A tarp, a weather balloon stuck in the trees, anything. The forest was darker and quieter than usual when I got there. No animals, no breeze. Even Rory was unusually still, just standing with his head low, watching the shadows between the trees. I scanned the area carefully. No tarp, no wires, no poles, just old pine needles and branches. I circled the spot, shining my flashlight, but nothing seemed out of place. No footprints, no crushed grass or foliage, no signs anyone had been there recently. I got back to my truck feeling uneasy, but chalked it up to some weird optical illusion or a drone glitch, maybe a trick of light and shadow I couldn't explain. The next day, I took the footage to a friend, Alex, who's really into photography and tech stuff. He helped me analyze the clip frame by frame. He agreed it wasn't a normal glitch. He pointed out the light wasn't from the drone or any reflection off the trees. He mentioned how strange the silence was too, since most cameras pick up some kind of noise or interference. We thought maybe it was some kind of drone interference, but the shape's stillness and the way the environment around it reacted made no sense. A couple nights later, I went back out to fly again, this time with my neighbor Sarah, who's got a similar drone. We flew side by side, trying to capture the same area. Just before reaching that spot, both our drones experienced some kind of signal lag. 1 second of loss of control, then back to normal. Same as my first flight. When we reviewed Sarah's footage, her drone also caught a vague, soft-edged shape in the exact same spot. Again, no movement, no sound, just this faint glow. That time, I noticed something else. On Sarah's video, right before the shape appears, there's this strange ripple in the air, like heat waves, but cold, almost like a distortion or shimmer. Neither of us could explain it. We tried going there at different times during the day and night, but the drones never showed it again. After a few more attempts, the feeling of being watched started creeping in. Whenever we were near that spot, Rory would growl low and wouldn't come close. Sarah said she felt her skin crawl and didn't want to be there alone. One night after I got home from work, I sat down to watch the footage again. I noticed that in the frames just after the wobble, my phone screen briefly flickered like it was struggling with the video file. Then the player crashed. I tried opening the file on my computer, but it was corrupted in that same exact section. I don't know what to make of it. The shape is there, frozen in the air, silent and unmoving, but every time I try to get closer or understand it, it vanishes or my equipment glitches out. I stopped flying my drone near that spot, and honestly, I don't even like driving by that area much anymore. Rory still gets uneasy when we pass by the edge of the forest, staring up into the trees like he sees something I don't. I guess some things just don't want to be found. We were out in the Mojave Desert, about 50 miles northwest of Joshua Tree, camping for the weekend. It was me, my wife Eliza, and our daughter Naomi, she was 7 at the time, plus our dog, a skinny little terrier mix named Juno. We'd chosen a spot on BLM land away from the campgrounds to get some real quiet. The sky was wide open out there, endless stars, the kind of place where you can see the Milky Way without any city glow. It was late April, and the days were warm, but the nights still got pretty cold. That first night, after we'd eaten and settled in, I went to start a small fire to keep us warm. Eliza and Naomi were inside the tent reading a book by flashlight. Juno was sniffing around the edges, chasing lizards or whatever desert critters come out at night. I was about 20 feet away from the tent, tending the fire, when I first noticed it. It was faint, like a whisper carried on the dry wind. I thought maybe it was the usual desert noises, the wind shifting through the scrub or a pack of coyotes in the distance. But then it got clearer, and it didn't sound like any animal or human I'd ever heard. It was voices. Multiple voices, whispering in a way that sounded like they were all talking at once, overlapping. But I couldn't understand any words. It wasn't English or Spanish or anything familiar, just soft murmurs, strange and urgent. I called Eliza over, and she stopped what she was doing to listen. Naomi peeked out of the tent, curious. Juno's ears perked up and the dog started growling low, but she didn't bark. We all just stood there, quiet, trying to make sense of it. The voices seemed to be coming from just above the tent, like maybe right in the air, not on the ground or in the distance. The desert was still except for the whispering, which felt like it was wrapping around us, circling. It wasn't loud, but it filled the silence in a way that made me want to look straight up. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it above the tent, scanning the sky. The stars were out and nothing was there. No helicopters, no planes, no drones, no lights moving, just the dark desert night. Eliza tried to reassure me it was probably something natural, wind through the brush or some kind of animal call, but the sound was so unlike anything I've ever heard in the desert. I know the desert has its weird noises, but this felt different, more deliberate, like a conversation we weren't meant to understand. We all moved closer to the tent, and the whispers seemed to fade a bit, but then they'd come back stronger when I stepped away. It was like the sound was tethered to the tent itself, but it wasn't something physical I could see or point to. Later, when Naomi was falling asleep, she whispered something about the people in the sky who were talking to her. She wasn't scared, more curious, but I could tell it was strange for her to say that. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard those whispers again, just beyond the edge of hearing. The next morning, we packed up early. I walked around the tent site to check for anything unusual, footprints, disturbed dirt, broken branches, but everything looked untouched. No sign that anyone had been there. Juno was still skittish, sniffing around nervously. On the drive home, Eliza joked that maybe we just imagined the whole thing, or maybe it was some weird echo from the wind in the canyon nearby. But I don't know. I kept thinking about those voices, how they sounded like they were right above us but invisible, like some kind of presence that didn't want to be seen. We've camped a lot since then, in all kinds of places, and nothing like that has happened again. But every now and then, when I'm outside at night and the wind is just right, I swear I hear faint whispers, not in any language I know, but the same quiet murmurs from that desert night. I've been fishing the northern coast of Maine for almost 20 years. Nothing much changes out there, except maybe the weather and the catch. My name's Luke Mallory, and I run a small boat called the Night Gull. I mostly do lobster traps and the occasional net fishing when the season calls for it. This happened late last winter in early March when the water's still freezing cold and the wind cuts like a knife. I'd been out before dawn, checking traps and hauling nets just like any other day. The air was crisp with a thick fog hanging low over the water, the kind that makes everything sound muffled and strange. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, just hoping for a decent haul to make the trip worth the cold. The sun was just starting to creep up when I pulled up one of the nets I'd set the day before. Usually, it's filled with cod or maybe a few crabs caught in the mesh, but when I started lifting this one, it felt heavier than it should, almost like it was snagged on something solid under the water. I hauled it up slow, trying not to lose my grip. The water dripping off the net was freezing against my gloves. Then I saw it. Mixed in with the usual fish and kelp was a smooth, triangular piece of metal. It looked out of place. No rust, no scratches, nothing that would tell me it had been in the ocean for long. The surface was completely smooth, and what really caught me off guard was that it felt warm, like comfortably warm, which didn't make any sense for something pulled from freezing water. I set the net down on the deck and picked up the triangle, turning it over in my hands. It was about the size of my hand, but thinner, almost paper thin, though it didn't bend. The edges were sharp, but perfectly even, like someone had cut it with a machine. The weird part was how the metal didn't feel cold or wet, just warm and dry, even though it had just been underwater. I shook it a bit, but nothing inside, no markings or compartments. It looked like a solid piece, but unlike anything I'd seen in the ocean before. No paint, no corrosion, just this smooth, dark gray surface with a slight shimmer when the fog light hit it. I sat down on the edge of the boat, watching the horizon as the fog started to lift, and the day got a little brighter. My dog, a scrappy terrier mix named Murphy, was curled up near the wheelhouse, but he perked up and sniffed the air when I brought the metal closer. He growled low at first, then just stared at it, head tilted like he couldn't figure out what to make of it. I wasn't sure what to do with it. I thought about tossing it back, but the warmth kept me from doing that. I wrapped it in an old towel and stashed it in the cabin under my bunk. The rest of the day passed slow. I kept glancing at the towel, feeling this odd pull like the thing wasn't just some random trash. It felt wrong to ignore it. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept waking up to the sound of the boat creaking, the wind tapping against the cabin windows. The towel was on the small table by the bunk. Murphy was restless, whining quietly, pacing in the little space. When I finally pulled the towel back to look at the metal again, it was different. Not in shape or color, but the warmth was stronger, almost like it was alive in some way. I held it in my palm and the air around me felt heavier. I swear I could hear something faint, like a humming, just below the edge of hearing. I closed the towel back up and tried to get some sleep, but my mind was racing. I kept thinking about the ocean, the cold water, and how something like this ended up tangled in my net. The next morning, I decided to show it to a friend, Pete, who's a mechanic and has a bit of a hobby for weird stuff people find on the coast. I drove the boat back to the dock and pulled the metal out again. It still had that smooth, warm feeling, like it was somehow insulated from everything around it. Pete looked it over carefully in his workshop, under bright lights. He poked and prodded it with a screwdriver and a magnet. No reaction. No scratches or dents. He said it looked like titanium or something similar, but unlike anything he'd seen from a plane or a ship. "Where'd you say you found this?" he asked. "In my net, out near East Point," I said. "Under a few 100 feet of water." He frowned. "That area is pretty deep and cold. Nothing usually floats up from that far down, especially something this clean." I nodded. It didn't make sense. I left the metal with him for a few days while he ran it through some tests, but no one could tell me what it was. On the way back to the boat, the fog had rolled back and thick. I kept looking out over the water, thinking about the strange warmth, the smoothness, the silence that seemed to come with it. That night, when I was alone on the boat again, Murphy started barking at the cabin door like someone was outside. I opened it to check, but there was no one there, just the dark sea stretching out under the fog. The hum I thought I'd heard the first night came back, very faint, like a pulse under the waves. I stood there for a long time, feeling it press against my ribs, wondering if the metal was sending it out somehow. The following days were quieter. Pete called to say the metal didn't match any alloys in their database, and the scanner had picked up some odd electromagnetic readings, but nothing concrete. Meanwhile, the fog didn't seem to lift much, and every time I went out, I caught that faint hum beneath the water. Murphy stayed close, ears perked, never settling down. Then, a few mornings after Pete's call, I was pulling in a net again when I noticed the water near the boat ripple without wind. A dark shape passed underneath, big and slow, moving parallel to the boat, keeping pace like it was watching me. I froze. It wasn't a whale or any fish I knew. It was too big, and the shape was wrong, more angular than natural, like a shadow of something solid, but unfamiliar. I tried to follow it with my eyes as it slipped beneath the boat and disappeared into the depths. The metal in the cabin felt warmer than ever that night, almost hot. I didn't touch it, just wrapped it up tight and locked it in a box I keep under the floorboards. After that, the hum stopped and the fog lifted slowly over the next 2 days. I took the metal back to Pete, told him I wanted to get rid of it, but he said he'd hold on to it until he could figure out what it was. Since then, things have gone back to normal. Murphy stopped barking at the cabin door, and the ocean looks like it always did, cold, gray, and quiet. I don't know what that piece of metal was or why it was warm out there in freezing water. I don't know what the dark shape was beneath the boat that morning. All I know is that sometimes, when the wind's just right, I swear I can still hear a faint hum coming off the water, like something waiting just out of sight. I was working a late shift delivering packages for a courier company out here in northern Vermont. The kind of job where you spend most of your time alone, driving winding country roads through stretches of forest and fields, especially once you get past the last few towns. I'd been doing this for about a year, so I knew the routes well enough to navigate without the GPS, but the app was still my go-to, especially at night. It was the end of October, a cool and clear evening just after sunset, and I was out doing a batch of deliveries that took me into some of the more remote areas. The kind of places where the trees lean over the road and the darkness presses in. I had a little beagle mix named Scout riding shotgun, and he dozed off in his crate by the time I was about halfway through the run. Around 8:45 p.m., I was driving down a narrow stretch of dirt road that snakes through a dense patch of pine and maple trees. I was almost to the next delivery, but the GPS started acting up. First, it lost the signal completely. The little dot representing my truck just froze on the screen. Usually, that'd clear up within a minute or two out here, but this time it didn't. I pulled over to the side, flipped the app off and on. Nothing. Then I rebooted the phone. Still no GPS signal. I checked the cellular bars, 2 bars, weak but there. I figured maybe the trees were blocking the satellite, so I sat there for a few minutes watching the screen, waiting. The weird part was that the phone clock kept running, but the GPS just stayed frozen on the same spot. I didn't notice anything odd at first. No sounds, no flickering lights, just the usual quiet of the forest at night. Scout woke up and gave a soft whine, looking up at me. I tried calling dispatch to let them know I was stuck with a dead signal. The call wouldn't connect. No ring, no voicemail. The phone acted like I was out of service range. I checked the time again. 10 minutes had passed. I was starting to get annoyed, thinking maybe the phone was glitching. I decided to keep driving slowly, hoping the GPS would catch up. The road was narrow, just enough for one truck, with thick woods pressing in on both sides. The headlights cut through the darkness in front of me, but the GPS stayed frozen on that same spot, like I was parked there, even though I was moving. Then something else started to feel off. The trees didn't seem to be passing like they should. It was as if the world outside the truck was static. I stopped the truck and got out, trying to listen for any sounds. Birds, bugs, wind. Nothing. Just an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. Scout growled low in his crate. I checked the time again. It was 20 minutes later. I sat back in the driver's seat, decided to keep going. The phone still no GPS. Then, all at once, the GPS signal came back. The map on my screen jumped forward. It showed I was already several miles down the road, past the next delivery point. I blinked at the phone, confused. I looked out the windshield. The road ahead looked familiar, but different, like I was somewhere I hadn't been yet, but also not far from where I'd been parked. I checked the clock on the dash. It was exactly 20 minutes later than when I'd lost the signal. But the weird thing was, I had zero memory of driving those miles. No memories of curves in the road, no sounds of tires crunching over gravel, no glimpses of trees or signs. Scout was quiet now, looking at me with those big eyes like he sensed something was wrong. I shook my head and tried to focus on the deliveries. I called dispatch again, and this time the call went through. I asked if anyone had reported any issues or strange signals in that area. The dispatcher said nothing unusual. I stopped at the next delivery address, a small cabin tucked back in the woods. The porch light was on, but no one answered when I knocked. On my way back, the GPS worked fine. But for the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about that stretch of road. No other drivers passed me. No animals crossed the road. And the silence during those 20 minutes, I've never heard anything like it before or since. I double-checked my phone the next day. No signs of errors or crashes. I tried to piece together what happened, but kept hitting a wall. Sometimes I wonder if I was driving at all during that time, or if I was just somewhere else, sitting still. The whole thing still puzzles me. I was out on the lake early that morning, well before sunrise, the kind of quiet where the world feels paused. The water was glassy smooth, no breeze at all, and the air smelled cold and damp. I had my little aluminum boat anchored near the middle of Silver Pine Lake, a spot I'd fished for years. My dog, Rook, a scruffy terrier mix, was curled up on the floor of the boat, eyes half closed but alert to every sound. I like fishing early because the water's calm, and I can think without distractions. That morning felt different right away. Everything was still. but it was the kind of still that presses on you like something's waiting just under the surface. I'd been watching the float for maybe 20 minutes when I noticed it. The water wasn't as still as I thought. Ripples started forming, but not like from a fish or a dropped lure. These were perfect circles, spreading out evenly from a point right about 20 feet in front of the boat. What freaked me out was there was no reason for them. No wind, no jumping fish, nothing falling in. The ripples kept spreading like someone was dropping stones in the water rhythmically, but I couldn't see any disturbance on the surface. I watched, rubbing my eyes because I thought maybe it was a trick of the light or my tiredness playing games. But Rook suddenly perked up and stood, growling low, staring at the ripples too. The circles kept forming, overlapping, growing wider, perfect and precise. They weren't random, like the usual rings you get from a splash. These were calculated, like someone was drawing with water. I called out to the lake, half joking, "Who's there? Stop messing with my fish." No answer, just the ripple spreading in silence. I looked around, scanning the shoreline. It was miles away, thick with pine trees and a few cabins, but no one was moving. The whole lake was still except for those ripples. I grabbed my phone to check the time and signal. Barely any bars out there, and no messages or missed calls. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was off, but the ripples kept coming, like a heartbeat in the water. I leaned over the side of the boat, trying to catch sight of what could be causing it. Nothing. Just the dark water, smooth except for the circles. The deeper I looked, the more I felt like the water was watching me back. Quiet, but heavy. After a while, I noticed the ripples were speeding up, faster now, like a pulse growing urgent. I checked the sky. Still just before dawn, stars fading but no clouds or wind. Suddenly, the water in the middle of those circles started to glow faintly, a pale blue light shimmering beneath the surface. It wasn't bright enough to light up the boat, but it was definitely there, pulsing softly in sync with the ripples. I blinked, and the light vanished. Rook growled again, stepping toward the front of the boat, hackles raised. I grabbed his collar and held him back, heart pounding. Whatever this was, it wasn't something I'd seen before. I reached for the oars, thinking maybe I'd row closer to the source, but the ripples stopped the moment I started moving. The water flattened again, completely still like nothing had happened. I sat there, frozen for a minute, listening. No birds, no bugs, no wind, nothing but the faint creak of the boat. Then, just as I was about to call it a weird morning and head back, I saw it. A dark shape moving under the water right where the ripples had been. It wasn't a fish, at least not any fish I know. It was too big, slow, and smooth, like a shadow sliding just beneath the surface. I leaned in to get a better look, and for a moment it felt like the lake was holding its breath with me. Then the shape was gone. No splash, no wave, nothing to show it was ever there except that empty space and the lingering stillness. I started the motor and headed back to shore fast, Rook whining softly at my feet. The closer I got, the more the normal sounds of the forest returned, birds waking up, a breeze rustling the leaves. When I got back to the dock, I told a couple of the other fishermen about the ripples and the light, but they just laughed it off. Must have been a loon or something, one said. But I know what I saw. That night I couldn't sleep. The ripples, the light, the shadow, they kept playing in my head like a broken record. I went back to the lake the next morning, same spot, same time, but everything was normal. No ripples, no light, no shadows. I don't know what was under the water that day. I don't know if it was something natural or something else. All I know is that lake held something strange for a few minutes, and I was the only one there to see it. I was cutting through a stretch of back road between Kayenta and Page, real empty country, red rock and dust, nothing but scrub and sky. It was late afternoon, but the sun was dropping fast behind the cliffs, turning everything orange and long-shadowed. I'd left Phoenix that morning and figured I'd stop for gas in Page, maybe grab a room if I got tired. The GPS had routed me onto this weird, narrow highway, State Route 98. It wasn't a road I'd ever taken, but it seemed faster than going around. My signal had cut out an hour earlier, but the map was still loaded, so I just kept going. I hadn't seen another car for a good 30 miles, not one. No billboards, no gas stations, no fences, just mesas and sand. It was almost peaceful until it wasn't. I first noticed it when I came over a rise and dipped into this shallow canyon. The road curved, then ran straight for a long stretch between two ridges. I checked my rear view, habit, I guess, and saw headlights, two of them. Close. I hadn't passed anyone. There were no turnoffs, no lights behind me for hours. But now, clear as day, someone was following me. I slowed down a little to let them catch up, thinking maybe it was a ranger or a local. But the lights kept the same distance, not gaining, not falling back, just there. I tapped my brakes a few times. Nothing. They didn't flash theirs or react in any way. The weirdest thing was I couldn't see the car, just the lights. Bright, like high beams, but not blinding. They didn't bounce or shift like headlights usually do when someone's hitting bumps or small hills. They just floated there. Same height, same spacing, same brightness. Too steady. After a few miles of this, I figured maybe it was just a trick of the road. Maybe there was a truck on a different highway behind me, and the angle made it look like it was tailing me. I decided to pull over and let it pass. There was a gravel shoulder wide enough to stop, so I eased onto it, threw on my hazards, and waited. The lights kept coming. But here's the thing. When I looked in the side mirror, I didn't see anything. The rear view still showed the lights, but the side mirror, just empty desert. I even leaned out the window a little to check. Nothing there. That's when I realized there was no road behind me. Not anymore. I swear to God I'd just been driving that same stretch. Asphalt, yellow lines, the whole deal. But when I look back now, it was just scrub and rock. No pavement, no tire marks, just open land. I thought maybe I'd turned without noticing, like there'd been a split in the road. But no, my tires were still on asphalt. I even opened the door and stepped out. The wind was picking up, carrying that dry, hot smell you only get out there. I walked a few feet behind the car. No road. It didn't make sense. I should have been able to see it stretching back at least a few hundred feet, but it just wasn't there. It looked like the road started right under my back tires and didn't exist before that. I walked back to the driver's side and checked the mirror again. Still lights, still behind me. I climbed back in and started driving again. Not fast, just steady. I watched the mirror the whole time. The lights didn't follow. They stayed in the same spot. Then, after about 5 minutes, they were gone. No fade, no curve in the road to hide them, just gone. I didn't feel relief. I felt watched. I kept glancing over my shoulder even though I knew nothing was there. Another few miles passed, the sun was nearly down now, and the whole desert looked flat and gray. That's when my headlights flickered. Once, twice, then stayed on. I tapped the dash, probably just a loose wire, I figured. The rental had been making a weird sound since I picked it up. A minute later, the engine made this soft whining noise like it was straining. RPMs dipped. The whole car jerked once, then smoothed out. That's when I saw movement up ahead. Something crossed the road. Quick, low to the ground. I only caught it in my peripheral vision. Might have been a coyote, but didn't move like one. It didn't run. It sort of glided. I slowed down to look, but there was nothing. No prints, no shape disappearing into the brush. The air felt weird, heavy. Not hot anymore, just thick. Then the static started. It came through the speakers, even though the radio was off. Just a low hiss, barely noticeable, but rising. Like a storm was nearby. I turned the knob, nothing changed. Tried to shut the stereo off completely, but it didn't respond. The hiss kept building until it suddenly cut out. Silence. That's when I noticed the sky. It wasn't dark yet, not fully, but the stars were already out, except above me. Directly overhead, there was this perfect circle of empty sky. No stars, just blank. It didn't look like a cloud. It was too precise, too still. I kept driving. A mile or two later, I saw lights again, but not behind me this time. Off to the side, maybe half a mile out, floating low over the desert. Two of them, close together, moving slow. I figured it might be a drone or a tower, but then they split. One went left, one went right. Both rose at the same time, then dropped in sync, then vanished. I pulled over again. I needed to breathe. When I stepped out, I noticed this faint humming. Not from the car, from the air. It was high-pitched and constant, like the sound you hear when a TV's on in another room. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, and then I heard something behind me. A soft crunch. I spun around. Nothing. Another crunch. Closer. I didn't see anything, but I swear something was moving through the brush, just out of sight. I got back in the car and locked the doors, took off down the road faster than I probably should have. Eventually, I saw a sign for Page, still about 20 miles out. The road widened a bit, and I started seeing the occasional fence post or light in the distance. Civilization creeping back in. The second I hit town limits, everything stopped. The static, the humming, the weird pressure in the air. I pulled into a gas station and sat in the lot for 10 minutes before getting out. Just stared at the lights, the other people, the pavement. Normal things. I looked behind me. The road was there, plain as day. 2 lanes, yellow stripes, tire marks, everything. But I checked the car's trip meter. The mileage didn't line up with where I should have been. I should have driven about 130 miles that day. The meter said 89. We were out in the Mojave Desert, about 50 miles northwest of Joshua Tree, camping for the weekend. It was me, my wife Eliza, and our daughter Naomi, she was 7 at the time, plus our dog, a skinny little terrier mix named Juno. We'd chosen a spot on BLM land, away from the campgrounds, to get some real quiet. The sky was wide open out there, endless stars, the kind of place where you can see the Milky Way without any city glow. It was late April, and the days were warm, but the nights still got pretty cold. That first night, after we'd eaten and settled in, I went to start a small fire to keep us warm. Eliza and Naomi were inside the tent, reading a book by flashlight. Juno was sniffing around the edges, chasing lizards or whatever desert critters come out at night. I was about 20 feet away from the tent, tending the fire, when I first noticed it. It was faint, like a whisper carried on the dry wind. I thought maybe it was the usual desert noises, the wind shifting through the scrub or a pack of coyotes in the distance. But then it got clearer, and it didn't sound like any animal or human I'd ever heard. It was voices, multiple voices, whispering in a way that sounded like they were all talking at once, overlapping. But I couldn't understand any words. It wasn't English or Spanish or anything familiar, just soft murmurs, strange and urgent. I called Eliza over, and she stopped what she was doing to listen. Naomi peeked out of the tent, curious. Juno's ears perked up, and the dog started growling low, but she didn't bark. We all just stood there, quiet, trying to make sense of it. The voices seemed to be coming from just above the tent, like maybe right in the air, not on the ground, or in the distance. The desert was still except for the whispering, which felt like it was wrapping around us, circling. It wasn't loud, but it filled the silence in a way that made me want to look straight up. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it above the tent, scanning the sky. The stars were out and nothing was there. No helicopters, no planes, no drones, no lights moving, just the dark desert night. Eliza tried to reassure me it was probably something natural, wind through the brush or some kind of animal call, but the sound was so unlike anything I've ever heard in the desert. I know the desert has its weird noises, but this felt different, more deliberate, like a conversation we weren't meant to understand. We all moved closer to the tent, and the whispers seemed to fade a bit, but then they'd come back stronger when I stepped away. It was like the sound was tethered to the tent itself, but it wasn't something physical I could see or point to. Later, when Naomi was falling asleep, she whispered something about the people in the sky who were talking to her. She wasn't scared, more curious, but I could tell it was strange for her to say that. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard those whispers again, just beyond the edge of hearing. The next morning, we packed up early. I walked around the tent site to check for anything unusual. Footprints, disturbed dirt, broken branches, but everything looked untouched. No sign that anyone had been there. Juno was still skittish, sniffing around nervously. On the drive home, Eliza joked that maybe we just imagined the whole thing, or maybe it was some weird echo from the wind in the canyon nearby. But I don't know. I kept thinking about those voices, how they sounded like they were right above us but invisible, like some kind of presence that didn't want to be seen. We've camped a lot since then in all kinds of places, and nothing like that has happened again. But every now and then, when I'm outside at night and the wind is just right, I swear I hear faint whispers. Not in any language I know, but the same quiet murmurs from that desert night. I was out flying alone one late afternoon, just a regular flight from my small private airstrip near Bend, Oregon, out over the Cascade foothills. The sky was clear, but starting to get that soft golden light you get in early fall, the kind that makes everything look a little warmer than it really is. I had my old Cessna 182 up about 7,000 feet, just cruising along and enjoying the quiet. After decades as a commercial pilot, I still liked the simplicity of these solo flights. No schedules, no passengers, just me and the plane. I usually don't bother much with radar when I'm flying out here. It's mostly clear airspace, and I trust my eyes and instruments. But this time, I decided to keep the little portable ADS-B receiver hooked up just for fun. It's a tiny device that shows you other aircraft nearby on a tablet screen, mostly so small private pilots like me don't accidentally get too close to anyone else. I wasn't expecting much out here in the wilderness. About 40 minutes into the flight, I was following a straight heading southwest, skimming over some pine forests and river valleys. The little screen was showing a few blips, mostly distant private planes or gliders. Then one of the blips caught my eye. It was moving strangely, not like the other planes that had predictable paths, but this one seemed to mimic me exactly. At first I thought it was just a coincidence, maybe some plane flying roughly parallel, but it kept pace with me, matching my every turn and climb with exact precision. When I banked right, the blip banked right too, same rate and angle. When I climbed, it climbed. When I leveled off, it stayed level. It was like I had a shadow on radar. I started to feel a little uneasy. I looked out the window, scanning the sky for any other aircraft, but there was nothing. No contrails, no lights, no shapes. Just the endless blue and forested hills below. I checked the ADS-B device again. The blip wasn't blinking or showing any call sign. Just a dot moving perfectly in sync, never drifting more than a few hundred feet away, sometimes closer. I radioed Bend Approach just to check if anyone else was in the area, but they said no one else was on their radar near me. No traffic at all. That made it worse, honestly. I was staring at a radar blip that was moving exactly like me, but no one else saw it. I tried a few maneuvers, a gentle turn left, then a steep climb, then a quick descent. The blip did the exact same thing every time, staying locked on. My heart rate was creeping up. I'm a calm guy, been through plenty of turbulence and tight spots, but this was something else. After about 10 minutes of this, I leveled off and started to watch closely, wondering what this thing was trying to do. And then, just as smoothly as it had appeared, the blip disappeared. No gradual fade or loss of signal. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. I stared at the screen for a long time after that, but nothing else showed up. I kept flying the route back home, eyes peeled for any sign of another plane, but all I saw was empty sky. When I landed, I took a screenshot of the radar display on my tablet and showed it to a few pilot friends. Some joked it was a drone or a glitch, but no one had ever seen anything that moved that way, so precisely without being visible. I thought maybe I'd misread it, but I kept replaying it in my head. The way it moved perfectly in sync was something I just couldn't explain. I've been flying for nearly 40 years and never encountered anything like that. No sound, no visual, just a silent, invisible shadow on my radar that mirrored every move until it vanished. I don't know what it was, just something that followed me through the sky and then disappeared, like it was never really there. I left the bus a little later than usual that Friday night. The air was sticky for late summer, thick with the smell of freshly cut grass and exhaust from cars idling along Main Street. I had my backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds in, music low, so I could hear the neighborhood around me. I usually walked home that way. It was a short cut, nothing too busy, just a stretch of cracked asphalt lined with old streetlights, some flickering from years of neglect. I noticed it about halfway down the block. The streetlights started flickering, one by one. Not all at once, like a power surge, but in sequence. As I walked, the first one would blink off, then the next, like some sort of slow, stuttering wave. My first thought was that the grid was acting up. We'd had storms earlier in the week, and these old lights weren't exactly reliable. But then I realized something. The flickering followed me. Every time I took a step, the lights would seem to react, blinking off in a pattern that matched my pace. I paused, took a step back, and watched. The light closest to me stayed on, the one ahead blinked off, and the next one farther up did the same, all in a staggered, perfect sequence. It was subtle, just enough that my brain couldn't quite convince me I wasn't imagining it. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was my imagination playing tricks with the half-light and shadows. I kept walking, faster this time, and the sequence picked up pace with me. The pattern made the road ahead seem like it was moving under a wave of darkness. My stomach tightened, but I figured maybe I was overthinking it. Halfway down the stretch, I heard something, a soft tapping, like fingernails against metal. I froze, looked around, but there was nothing. No one on the street, no cars, just me and the sequence of lights blinking along as I moved. The tapping stopped, then started again, faintly, irregular, somewhere behind me. I kept walking but started glancing over my shoulder. Nothing, just the empty sidewalk, the trees swaying in the light of my flickering companions. The shadows looked off, though, long, stretching in directions that didn't make sense with the streetlights still on. For a second, I thought I saw movement, something tall, dark, slipping between the trees. When I blinked, it was gone. I tried to speed up. The streetlights kept up with me. They flickered faster now, perfectly timed with my steps. It was like the whole block was alive, watching, reacting. I reached the corner where my street met Oak Avenue. Normally, the next few blocks had lights that stayed steady. Not tonight. They blinked, too, in sequence, as if the wave had followed me this far. I started feeling paranoid. My earbuds were dead, and the quiet had grown heavy. There was a strange hum, low, almost imperceptible under the normal nighttime sounds. Crickets, the faint rustle of leaves. It wasn't loud enough to be a car or a generator, just a constant vibration in the air that I couldn't ignore. I glanced down at my phone, checking the time, and the screen briefly flickered as if it had caught the rhythm of the streetlights. I tried to convince myself it was all random. Old wiring, maybe a transformer hiccup, but it didn't explain the way the pattern shifted as I slowed or the soft tapping that followed me for blocks. I passed a corner store with its neon sign flickering in rhythm with the streetlights, and I almost stopped. Something in the reflection on the window made me look twice. I thought I saw a figure standing far down the block, just out of the pool of light. When I blinked, it was gone. I took a deep breath, tried to relax, and started walking at a normal pace. The flickering continued, but it was slower now, almost gentle, like a wave rolling past me. Then, the low hum became more distinct. I could almost feel it vibrating through my chest. I stopped and crouched, thinking I could trace the sound, but it didn't come from anywhere obvious. No cars, no transformers, no animals. Just the empty street and the flickering lights above. I took out my phone and tried to record, hoping to capture something to show my friends later. The moment I pressed record, the lights blinked all at once and held steady. The tapping and hum vanished. It was unnerving. Nothing moved, nothing flickered, the street looked normal again, but the pattern had disappeared entirely. I kept the phone out, recording anyway, the red dot glowing, nothing but the quiet street in frame. I started walking again, trying to keep my nerves in check. Every shadow looked strange, stretched too long or too dark for the lampposts, and every rustle in the trees made me jump. I kept checking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure again, but it didn't return. The rest of the walk was uneventful, except that I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed, not by a person, but by the same kind of presence that had been orchestrating the lights. I got to my house and locked the door behind me, breathing hard. My parents were asleep. The TV was off. I sat on the couch with the recording running, staring at the small screen. In the footage, nothing seemed unusual. The streetlights blinked once or twice before fading out of frame, and the tapping and hum weren't audible at all. It was just a normal night, empty and quiet. I tried to sleep, but kept thinking about the pattern, the rhythm of the flickers, the way the lights seemed to move along with me. I replayed the walk in my mind, over and over. Every time I did, I felt that same unease, the idea that something invisible was pacing me, nudging the world around me into strange, subtle rhythms I could barely perceive. The next morning, I walked to the bus stop with a friend, joking about seeing ghost streetlights or hearing things. My friend laughed and said maybe I needed more sleep. I didn't argue. I just kept quiet, thinking about how, even in daylight, the memory lingered. The street was ordinary, filled with the hum of cars and the light of the sun, but I knew something had shifted that night. Something I couldn't see now but had followed me home. I haven't walked that block at night since. I take the longer route past the main road where the lights are consistent, predictable. But sometimes when I walk alone in the dark on a different street, I swear I can feel it again. The flicker of lights in sequence, the soft tapping echoing somewhere behind me, the low hum brushing my ears. And I wonder if I'd ever be lucky enough or unlucky enough to see it move again. I don't usually keep tabs on stuff like security cameras, never been much for paranoia, but after a week of weird nights, I figured I might as well check the footage from the little system I set up outside my place in Newark. Just one of those ring things, cheap and simple, mostly to keep an eye on the porch, since packages tend to go missing around here sometimes. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, honestly. It started about a week ago. One morning I woke up, coffee in hand, scrolling through the notifications from the night before. That's when I saw it, this dark blur standing right outside my front window. It was around 3:03 in the morning, which I thought was weird enough. The figure didn't move at all, just stood there like it was watching the house. No knocking, no sound. Just there. I replayed it a few times, slowed it down even. The thing looked almost like a person but too dark, like a shadow with a kind of shape but no features, no clothes or anything you'd expect, just this black form. It wasn't blocking the street or anything, just right by the window. I told myself it was probably a tree branch or some trick of the camera, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Especially since every night after that, same time, same spot, the figure showed up again. Always 3:03 a.m., always motionless. I tried checking outside in the morning, looking for footprints or anything. Nothing. The grass was undisturbed, the porch clean. Even asked my neighbor, old Mr. Jenkins, if he'd seen anything odd late at night. He said no, just the usual coyotes howling. One night I stayed up watching the live feed. The whole house was quiet, and at exactly 3:03, there it was again, just standing outside the window. I put on a jacket and headed outside to see if I could catch whoever it was, but by the time I got to the porch, nothing. No figure, no sign. I started feeling like I was losing it. Maybe it was some kind of glitch in the camera, or maybe the stress from work was getting to me. But then, 2 nights later, I woke up to this low humming sound. Not loud, more like a vibration that filled the air. It didn't last long, just a couple minutes, but it was enough to make me sit up and listen. I checked the camera again the next day. The shadowy figure was there, like clockwork. But on the footage, right after 3:03, the humming sound is faintly picked up too. I don't remember hearing it live, but there it was, clear on the recording. It's not like anyone's trying to break in. Doors and windows are locked, nothing's been touched or missing. But that figure, it's always there, like it's watching. Sometimes I catch myself peeking out the window at night, half expecting to see it standing just beyond the glass. I don't know what it wants or why it's there, just that it comes every night at the same time, silent and still. No footprints, no sounds, nothing but that faint hum sometimes and that shadow. I'm still here, still watching the door, wondering if maybe someday it'll step forward. But for now, it just waits. I work the graveyard shift at a small satellite radio station out in the middle of nowhere. It's mostly dead air and pre-recorded stuff. But every night from 3:03 to 3:05 a.m., something weird cuts in on one of our frequencies. It's like clockwork, and no one knows where it's coming from. I first noticed it a few months back. I was bored out of my mind, just scrolling through the soundboard and checking the signal feeds, when the usual white noise suddenly changed. At exactly 3:03, this pattern of pulses and mechanical clicking started playing on one of our less popular channels. I thought maybe it was a test tone or some weird interference from a nearby transmitter, so I checked the logs. Nothing scheduled for that time, and no other reports of interference. The sounds themselves were strange, rhythmic, but not musical. Like someone was sending a message in code, but not Morse or anything I recognized. The clicking was sharp, almost metallic, but oddly regular. It repeated the same sequence every night. I tried recording it on the station's main computer, but oddly, The recording software kept crashing or freezing during the broadcast window. I figured maybe the file was corrupt or some glitch in the system. I saved what I could, but even that felt incomplete. After a week of hearing the broadcast, I mentioned it to my supervisor. He brushed it off as interference from a satellite or something natural, but when I pressed, he told me the engineering team looked into it and couldn't trace it. There was no known source. The satellite logs showed nothing unusual, and all our equipment was running normally. So I started keeping a log myself, noting the exact time and duration. Every night, like clockwork, from 3:03 to 3:05, the pulses and clicks played on that channel. Nothing else, no signal before or after, just those 2 minutes. I tried tuning in on different receivers around the building, same thing. It was definitely coming in through the satellite feed. One night, I decided to try something different. I set up my phone to record audio nearby the speakers during the broadcast. When I listened back in the morning, the recording was silent except for the faint hum of the room. No pulses, no clicking. I was baffled. The radio definitely played the sounds, but my phone didn't pick them up at all. It was like the sounds existed only inside the station's equipment or speakers. A few nights later, I noticed something else. The temperature in the studio would drop slightly during the broadcast. Not enough to be uncomfortable, but definitely noticeable. I checked the thermostat logs, and they confirmed a consistent 2-degree drop during that exact 2-minute window. The air felt heavy, like before a storm, but there were no storms in the forecast. I mentioned it to a coworker, but he just laughed, said I was imagining things. After a couple weeks, I started hearing faint noises around the building right after the broadcast ended. Nothing clear, just soft thuds or scraping sounds from outside. I went out to check a few times, but found nothing. The security cameras showed no movement. It was like something was there, but invisible or out of frame. The weirdest part was that my phone would lose signal or randomly restart during those nights when I was in the building. Not just during the broadcast, but up to an hour before and after. I swapped phones, tried different carriers, but it happened every time I was near the studio between midnight and 4 a.m. One night, I brought in a handheld radio scanner to see if anything else was on the frequency. Around 3 a.m., I heard static like usual, but as it hit 3:03, the rhythmic clicks came through loud and clear on the scanner. Except this time there was another layer, a low humming sound, almost like a motor winding up beneath the clicking. It was faint and constant, but definitely there. After 3:05, it stopped. That same night, I noticed the lights in the building flickered just before the broadcast started. Not a full blackout, just a brief dimming, like the power grid hiccuped. I checked with the local utility company the next day. They said there were no reported outages or issues. I started feeling watched during those nights, especially around 3 a.m. The security cameras showed nothing, but I'd catch glimpses of shadows moving just at the edge of my vision when I stepped away from the equipment. No one else was in the building, but the feeling was real. I even found the door to the server room unlocked once when I was sure I'd locked it before starting my shift. One morning I found a small scratch on the console, like a fingernail scrape, but I'm the only one who has access at night, and the station is locked up tight. I can't explain how it got there. I didn't tell anyone. I don't know if someone's been sneaking in or if something else is going on. I tried to talk about it with the engineering guys again, but they just said it was probably a glitch in the satellite signal or some kind of interference from space debris. That didn't explain the temperature drop, the phone issues, or the scratch. Last week, I stayed later after my shift ended. Around 3:10 a.m., I heard a soft tapping on the window behind the studio. I froze, waited for a minute, but when I looked, there was nothing there. No branches, no animals. Just empty darkness. I don't know if anyone else hears the broadcast. It's on a frequency barely anyone listens to, and I've never found a recording that plays outside the station. It's like it's meant only for this one place. Whatever it is, it's there every night, but no one can explain it. The strangest part is that despite all this, the station runs perfectly fine the rest of the time. No malfunctions, no interruptions, no visitors. Just me, the broadcast, and that 2-minute window where everything feels off. I keep thinking maybe I'm losing it or maybe I'm reading too much into things. But then I remember that scratch on the console and the chill that hits right before 3:03 every night. I don't know what it means or if it means anything at all. I just know it's there. I work as a park ranger out in the Cascades at this place called Cedar Ridge Preserve. It's not a huge park or anything, but it's mostly untouched forest, a few hiking trails, and a couple of remote campsites. The area is quiet, especially once you get a few miles from the main parking lot. My shifts usually have me checking in on trails, making sure no one's doing anything stupid, that kind of thing. One of my jobs is to monitor a set of motion sensor cameras we've got set up along some of the less traveled trails. The cameras mostly catch wildlife: deer, raccoons, the occasional elk. Every once in a while, hikers or campers show up on them too. The footage is mostly boring. I watch it on a laptop in the little ranger station, usually late in the evening or early morning when there's less to do out in the field. A few weeks ago, I was looking over the footage from Trail 7, which runs along a ridge and then drops down into a thick grove of old firs. That section's not popular. Hardly anyone takes it because the terrain gets rough and cell service is non-existent. I was scrolling through a batch of video clips from the previous day when something caught my eye. Around 7:15 p.m., just as the sun was setting, the camera caught a figure standing in a clearing about 20 feet from the lens. The strange thing was, the figure wasn't moving at all. Not like someone standing still or waiting. It was unnaturally motionless, like a statue. I rewound the clip and watched it a few times. The figure was about 6 feet tall, slender, but there were no clear details. No clothing folds, no hair, nothing that looked familiar. It was smooth, like the surface of a polished stone or plastic. No visible features or texture. The shape was vaguely human, but too smooth and featureless to be a person in a suit or even a jacket. Its arms hung straight down at its sides, and it didn't blink or shift its weight. The clip was only 10 seconds long before the motion sensor stopped recording. I thought maybe it was someone standing still and the sensor just cut off. So I went back through the previous footage from that camera, thinking maybe it caught the figure approaching or leaving. There was nothing. No footprints or animals in the frames before or after. The trail leading into the clearing was empty. The usual forest sounds were missing too. No birds, no wind rustling the leaves. The whole 10-second clip had this eerie silence. That night, I went back out to the clearing in person. The spot was real, just like on the footage, a small patch of open ground surrounded by thick fir trees. The dirt was soft from a recent rain, and I looked around for tracks. There were prints from deer and squirrels, but no human footprints, no tire marks, nothing odd. I kept checking the footage every day after that. 2 more nights later, the camera caught the same figure at almost the same time, standing in roughly the same spot. It didn't move, didn't blink, didn't shift in any way. Then it vanished. When I say vanished, I mean it was there in one frame, and then the very next frame, it was gone. No blur, no fading, no leaving the frame, just completely disappeared. I checked the frame before and after several times. Nothing showed any sign of movement leading up to the disappearance. The timestamp was steady, no glitching. The thing is, the footage is grainy, low res, no details, just a blurry silhouette. But that smoothness was there, like the figure was something not quite solid. I asked a coworker to look at the clip and see if they noticed anything. He said it looked like a person in a morph suit or some kind of uniform, but that didn't explain the sudden disappearance. At this point, I started feeling weird about the whole thing. It wasn't just the figure. It was the way the forest felt whenever I went near that clearing. Quiet in a way that wasn't normal, like the trees were holding their breath. One evening, I decided to hike the trail about an hour before sunset and set up to watch the spot myself. I brought my dog, Sadie, a border collie mix who's usually calm but alert. We got to the clearing around 6:30 p.m. and sat down on a fallen log nearby. At first, nothing happened. Sadie sniffed around, ears perked, but she didn't bark or act nervous. The forest was still, the kind of still that's heavy, like everything's waiting for something. Then, just as the sun was dipping below the horizon, I saw it. A shape standing at the far edge of the clearing, exactly where the camera had caught it. The same smooth, featureless silhouette, motionless, blending into the dusk shadows. I didn't move. Sadie tensed beside me, her hackles rising. The figure just stood there, watching. There was no sense of hostility, but something about it felt off. It didn't breathe or blink. It didn't shift its stance. After about 5 minutes, the figure simply disappeared. One moment it was there, the next, nothing but empty air. No sound, no movement. Sadie let out a low growl, and I stood up, heart pounding. We didn't stay long after that. I've kept an eye on the trail cameras since then. The figure hasn't come back, at least not that I've seen. But sometimes when I'm walking through the woods near that clearing, I get this feeling like I'm being watched. Not by an animal or a person, but something else, something that's not quite there. I don't know what it was, and I don't expect to. It's just a part of the forest now, a quiet presence I can't explain. I was out on Lake Winnemuck on a Tuesday evening, one of those late spring days where the air holds on to warmth even after the sun slips behind the trees. I'd brought my old aluminum rowboat, the one Dad gave me years ago, and a couple of fishing poles. Just me and my dog, Harper, a lanky golden retriever who loves water but hates the idea of getting too wet. The lake's tucked away behind a few miles of winding dirt roads, surrounded by thick pines and birches. It's not a popular spot. Mostly local folks who know about it keep to themselves. That evening, the water was mirror calm. The surface so smooth I could see the pale pinks and oranges of the sunset folding into the darkening sky. I was sitting near the middle of the lake, casting my line out, half listening to the sounds of Harper softly paddling beside the boat. She was dozing, head resting on the edge of the boat, eyes barely open. The whole scene felt peaceful in that way you only get out where there's no traffic, no buzz of lights, no voices. Then, out of nowhere, this silver oval appeared about 20 yards off the starboard side. It was just above the water, maybe 2 feet, reflecting the last bit of light like polished metal. I swear it wasn't moving, just hovering there, but somehow I caught a glimpse of it dipping down toward the water. What happened next is the part I still can't figure out. The oval slipped under the surface, but without a single ripple. No splash, no disturbance at all. Just vanished, as if the water accepted it without a fight. I blinked, expecting to see bubbles or waves, but the water stayed perfectly still. The surface looked untouched, like I'd imagined something going in, but nothing really had. Then this thin steam started rising, right where the oval had gone under. It curled up in the cool air, rising straight for maybe 10 or 15 seconds, then slowly faded away. It wasn't fog or mist, too concentrated and sudden, like someone poured a cup of hot water into a cold lake, but I knew that made no sense. The lake was still warm from the day. Harper stirred, sniffed the air, and gave a soft growl. Not her usual playful bark, more like she sensed something off. I rubbed her head, telling myself I was just seeing things, that maybe the sun was playing tricks on me with reflections, or that it was some kind of fishing equipment someone lost. I looked around for a boat or anyone else. Nothing. No other boats, no fishermen, not even a bird flying near. The shoreline was empty, silent except for the usual rustle of leaves. I tried to keep fishing, but my hands felt cold, like the quiet had sunk into my skin. The weirdness stuck with me, how something could disappear like that without disturbing a thing, and then leave steam in its place. I kept staring at the spot, half expecting it to surface again, or for something else to happen. The sun was almost gone when I finally packed up. Harper seemed tense the whole way back to shore, eyes flicking toward the trees as if expecting someone or something to emerge. Once we reached the dock, the normal sounds of frogs and crickets felt too loud. At home later, I found myself checking the lake from my porch, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of light or some odd wave pattern. But every time I thought about that silver shape, the image felt wrong. Too smooth, too deliberate to be natural. That night, I dreamt of water that swallowed the sky and a shape gliding just beneath the surface, waiting. When I woke up, the feeling was still there, like something unseen was hovering just beyond the edge of my vision. I haven't been back to the lake since that night. Harper sometimes stares toward the woods when we're outside, ears stiff, and I get the same cold feeling in my chest. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I imagined it. But whatever it wasn't like anything I've ever seen before. No splash, no noise, just that smooth silver shape disappearing beneath the surface, leaving only steam behind. I was tracking a deer that had vanished into the lower saplings when I heard the first click. Name's Eli Mercer. I hunt around the Hollis Ridge a couple times a month. Public land, rough track, enough oak and hemlock that the deer have places to hide and a man can practice patience. I had taken the little logging trail farther than I usually do because the wind was good and there'd been fresh sign, a scrape, a rub, a faint drag in the leaves. It was late October and the dusk came quick. The air was the cold kind that makes your lungs taste like metal. I'd been wearing my orange vest, had the Thompson over my shoulder, the bipod folded under, and my old Zeiss scope on the rifle. I like that scope. It's simple, clear, none of that glare nonsense. The woods were the usual evening orchestra when I left the truck. Cicadas winding down, a thin line of crickets, occasional far-off bark of hounds. By the time I pushed through the last stand of saplings, the songs were thinning, and the sky over the ridge was the flat color of old nickel. The light was going the way it always does out there, honest and fast. I wasn't worried about being late. I'd planned on moving slow, following the scrape. The first odd thing was small. The birds cut out. 1 second there were robins and a thrush working the understory, and then nothing. A hard quiet slid over the ridge like someone pulled a blanket. It's not the kind of quiet that means there's a storm coming. It was the animal hush, the one that settles when something in the woods has noticed something and decided to be polite about alarm. My hair went a little up on my neck. I kept moving but quieter, and the sound of my own boots on leaf litter sounded too loud. A minute later, something knocked. 3 times. Not a branch falling, not the hollow knuck of a woodpecker. 3 clean, hollow clicks, spaced, echoing uphill and then settling into the trees. The sound came from above me, not out ahead or behind. It was sharp enough that I stopped and put a hand on my rifle barrel purely out of habit. I didn't want to look up because up is where you see the sky, and I wanted the deer, but I had to. I saw the trunks, the branches, the gray sky, and then the second click, and my head went up. There was a dark triangle moving just above the treetops, matte black, no shine. It wasn't high and it wasn't low, just barely clearing the canopy. The edges were straight, the shape precise, the underside flat against the sky like someone had laid a board over the tops of the trees. It moved with a slow, deliberate glide. No sound. Nothing like the trucked-in chatter of a crop duster or the obvious sweep of a satellite. If I squinted, it was like a paper airplane cut out of shadow and set loose. I've seen owls and big raptors sit on thermals at dusk and their noisy wings even at a distance. This thing made no sound. There was no rotor wash bending the highest branches, no echo of a whine through the holler. It passed over the oaks with a movement that felt patient, like it was scanning the ground for something and taking its time. The second time it passed my position, because it made a slow circle, I heard 2 more clicks, spaced the same as the first 3. After the last echo, the birds stayed quiet. I remember the ordinary things that happened to keep my own head steady. Check the safety, keep the barrel pointed downrange, breathe slow. I learned long ago not to do anything dramatic in the woods. I shouldered the rifle and eased to a knoll so I could see the ridge line ahead. My scope was dialed for distance. I lifted and the reticle found the triangle as a dark patch against a steel sky. That's when the scope fogged from the inside. I'll never forget that little dot of steam that gathered under the glass like a mouthy exhale. It clouded across the lenses and blurred the silhouette into soft charcoal. I took the rifle down to my knee and wiped the eyepiece with my sleeve. Nothing. The fog was on the inside and it smeared no matter how I wiped. It cleared a hair at the center where I'd breathed and then blurred again. I set the butt of the rifle into my shoulder and tried to look along the barrel, past the glass, and the triangle, when I could make it out, had slid down between the trees and come back up along a different vector, like it was mapping the understory. It wasn't a plane, not in any way I know. I thought maybe some hunter with a homemade kite or a remote glider, but anyone piloting that low would make sound and leave a wake in branches. No wake. When it was over the north copse again, it seemed to hesitate and then accelerate. One clean motion, almost vertical, and the sky swallowed it. There was no contrail, no vapor, no sound of blades cutting air. The only thing left was my breath fogging because I'd suddenly held my breath too long. When it lifted like that, time didn't jump exactly, but my watch was off. I checked the cheap digital on my wrist because old habits are good. It read 5:26. I remember thinking I'd been out longer. My mind had been counting minutes, and they felt longer, like someone stretched a strip of film. Later that night, the watch would be 2 minutes different from the truck clock. That's the kind of small wrong that nags you more than a big wrong does. After the triangle vanished, the birds came back in a cautious ripple. A squirrel barked its complaint 3 trees over. The wind crept in, and the woods resumed the ordinary hiss they always have. My legs were rubbery, but I'm not proud of sharp panic. I worked my way back along the deer's path slowly, keeping my shoulders low and my steps soft. The scrape was real, fresh, like the buck had only just moved through. Antler hair stuck to the bark. Tracks in the mud. Whatever had been up there moved like it was studying ground sign. I told myself a dozen reasonable things on the walk back. Maybe a late hunter had a bird hunting decoy on a line. Maybe someone had launched a dark kite from a clearing. Maybe I'd misread distance and the triangle was farther away than it looked. The problem with each theory was the scope fog. I'm a practical man, and equipment leaves traces. You get fog from moisture and temperature shifts, from breathing when the glass is cold, from using a lens in rain, but fools forget the absurdity that things like scope fogging from the inside feel less like nature and more like an object touching the same space your eyes use. I reached the truck before full dark. The parking pullout was empty, but for the dull glow of my brake lights. The heater in the cab was still warm from earlier. I sat with the engine idling and fingers on the wheel while the wool of my jacket dried slowly. I thumbed open my phone, but bars were scarce the way they get under canopy. A text from Louis, my buddy who usually meets me at the ridge now and then, blinked. "You call me?" He'd been in town and said he'd seen 2 kids with a drone near the feed store earlier, but he shrugged it off. I didn't want to make small talk. I drove home slow on the holler roads, headlights cutting the mist. The radio caught a faint AM hymn station and then went silent for a stretch where static swallowed whole songs. I thought about reporting it to the game warden, but the last time I'd called in on something odd, someone's fire that turned out to be a controlled burn, made me feel small. There's a kind of private shame in telling a story that can be shrugged away. So I told no one at first, not until I'd sat in the kitchen and poured a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt paper and listened to its steam. The scope cleared in the place it always clears, when the ambient temp inside the cab met the glass and the condensation evaporated. I cleaned the lens with a proper rag later and looked for salt or residue. Nothing. I can't find fingerprints for reasons that make sense. At the rifle shop the next weekend, a man named Gabe told me sometimes scopes fog in weird ways. He had 100 explanations. Seals that fail, tiny breaks where humidity gets in on a long hunt. He checked the eyepiece, turned the tube in the sun, and handed it back like a man dealing with the weather. I slept badly that night. My dog, Rex, padded in and out of the bedroom like he was checking doors. In the middle of the night, I went outside and stood by the back fence with a cigarette and watched the ridge. There was nothing, only the flat wash of stars I'm used to seeing. Occasionally a plane traced across the sky far high, polite and loud enough you knew it had engines. None of them were that triangle. I thought about what it had done, how it had wound along the treetops as if reading every line of bark. I thought about how my scope criticized me in that exact moment and how easily all the world goes back to normal after something odd slips by. I told Luis the next afternoon because not saying things makes them larger in your head. He listened and clicked his tongue a few times. "You sure it wasn't a banner tow or parasail?" he said. He asked if I had trail cam footage or quick notes. I had nothing. The other men at the feed store had their own stories, little bright things over cornfields in summer, a light that hung by a silo and then moved on. We swapped tales like old men swap recipes, half one-up and half disbelief. No one offered a satisfying explanation. A week passed and I went back to the ridge twice because hunting is what you do and you don't hand your woods over to a memory. Nothing else turned up. The deer were where deer are, the rut moved along, and the world stayed the world. But every time the sky on a late afternoon went that steel nickel color, I found my eyes lifting without meaning to, tracking the treetops for a clean black edge. There are things I can't prove and things I know I saw. The triangle was one of them. My truck clock and my watch disagree by 2 minutes if you ask them. Annoying, small, unnecessary. My scope fogged from the inside, and I can't find a mechanical reason for it that sits clean in the world. The woods sometimes muzzled their sounds in a way that put me on my heels. None of it culminated in a catastrophe. I came home, I cleaned my rifle, I mended a strap on my pack, I went back out the next weekend with a friend. We walked the rusted boots path and left our own marks. The compass didn't twitch and the birds sang again. At night, when the house is quiet and the kettle is making its small protest, I will catch myself glancing up at the tree line from the kitchen window like a man habitually checking his doors. The ridge looks ordinary under the moon. But the odd little things sit in my head in a row, the clicks first among them, and I find myself slowing down when I pass any stand of oaks, listening for anything that isn't wind.